Hey, good morning. It is Friday, April 11th. I'm Chris Glover. Heather is away. Here's what's making news right now. Keeping tabs on long-term visitors to the United States, the Trump White House rolls out its tough new restrictions for travelers, including Canadians.
The game is changing. What's next? What'll I have to do? And if you're down there, you're more vulnerable to the changes.
Why the new rules have some snowbirds flying north. And breaking this morning, China fires off a counter-strike in its trade war with the U.S. We will have details on Beijing's tariff hike on American imports. And Donald Trump disrupts the federal election race again. Mark Carney pauses his campaign to address the latest tariff turmoil.
There are tariffs that remain in place. Those tariffs are threatening our families, our workers, and our businesses.
Carney is primed to start his day with a meeting with senior advisors, but the race continues. We will look at what the other party leaders are up to on day 20 of the campaign. Also ahead this morning, how will investors respond to the latest developments in Donald Trump's global trade war? We will soon find out as the North American markets open in just 30 minutes. Plus,
good morning, and some weather headlines to know this Friday. Pleasant on the east and west coast. Spring continues to sputter along in Ontario and Quebec. And across the prairies, we got some April yo-yo weather and fair weather for the Masters golf tournament through the weekend. Details in your national forecast.
All right, buddy, thank you. If you're traveling to the U.S. and planning an extended stay, we have some breaking news that you need to hear. A new rule is now in effect. It's a change that comes from the U.S. crackdown on border security. It's been in the works since President Donald Trump signed an executive order on his first day in the White House. The border crackdown has sparked warnings to Canadians who work in the U.S. and spend a lot of time there. And earlier this month, the federal government updated its travel advice to remind Canadian travelers to expect, quote, closer scrutiny from U.S. border officers. And Linda Ward is leading our coverage this morning. Linda.
Yeah, so this is sort of one of those what's old is new again stories. This has actually been around since 1940. It was called the Alien Registration Act. And this executive order that Donald Trump signed on his first day in office, protecting the American people against invasion, now just requires the Department of Homeland Security to actually enforce it. And it has a lot of Canadians rethinking that decision of whether to travel to the United States, not just for patriotic reasons, but because of a lot of the uncertainty right now. Let's take a look at the Fort Erie Bridge crossing this morning. Canadians crossing the border, staying for 30 days or longer. Well, they now have to register with the U.S. government. This new rule applies to Canadian citizens 14 years of age and older. If you enter by air, you most likely were automatically registered. If you have a work or student visa, you're likely covered as well. If you enter by land border, like these folks, though, you're most likely not. Now, you won't be given any proof as to whether or not you have the necessary registration. You need to carry one of these. This is the I-94 arrival departure record. The way you're going to check for this is to go to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection's website. If it's not on there, you're going to need to register online. The fingerprint requirement, though, that is not applicable to Canadians. Canadians are exempt from that. If you don't do it and you're caught without carrying one of these cards around, failing to register, fined up to $5,000, potentially up to 6 months in jail or both. A lot of Canadians we know fall into this category. We think about snowbirds, for example, and you spoke with a snowbird last hour who just returned from her winter in Florida, and she is rethinking her plans for next year.
Just the whole aura of this change in relationship and the requirements. The question I think most Canadians are asking is, what's next? The people in power in the United States are constantly changing the rules. The game is changing. What's next? What'll I have to do? And if you're down there, you're more vulnerable to the changes. So it's difficult. I've spoken to many fellow Canadians and Americans too, and they're all very sympathetic.
So, Linda, while she and so many others try to deal with that mess and that confusion, we're also getting updated advice from the government of Canada on travel to the United States. What are they saying?
Yeah, so the travel risk level, it remains low. They're saying take normal security precautions, but they have issued this on the website earlier this week. This warning from Global Affairs Canada, U.S. authorities strictly enforce entry requirements. Expect scrutiny at ports of entry, including of electronic devices. Comply and be forthcoming in all interactions with border authorities. Always good advice. If you're denied entry, you could be detained while awaiting deportation. And it's not just Canada that has issued warnings like this. We've also seen this from places like Germany, from the UK. U.S. Border Patrol, they have a lot of power when you're at the border. Once you pass that border, they need a warrant, but they don't need it in order to search your belongings, your cell phone, your laptop, to seize those things as well. They're using those things to try and determine whether or not you pose any kind of risk to the country. You might commit a crime, for example. But with everything that's been going on between Canada and the United States right now, the warning is that there is going to be more scrutiny in those searches. You can refuse it, but you may not be allowed to cross into the border. You may have your phone seized. You could be detained for several hours. And we heard from this Calgary professor who was supposed to be at a conference in Honolulu who canceled over fears of that increased scrutiny.
I am a dual citizen, and so I would travel with my U.S. passport. But given stories of how people, even citizens, can be hassled by border guards, and I've had that in the past. It was infrequent, but I have had situations where border guards at the U.S. crossing have asked me why I live in Canada. Is it the U.S. not good enough? And from the stories that I've heard, it has definitely ramped up.
So, yeah, we're hearing stories like that, hearing stories of foreign nationals as well who had all the necessary precautions, but who've been either turned away at the border or even detained at the border. So we're seeing that play out across the country, and Canadians just not going down south right now, potentially, maybe changing their plans. Schools, school districts that have even said, we're not planning any more trips down to the States. Airlines that have scaled back the number of flights just because the demand isn't there.
Wild time to be alive. All right, Linda, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to get you up to speed now on the latest on the U.S. trade war. China is now retaliating for the fresh escalation by U.S. President Donald Trump. Beijing will be hitting U.S. imports with a 125% tariff. And as Patrick Falk tells us, Chinese President Xi is signaling that he will not be backing down.
President Xi Jinping has also spoken about the tariffs for the first time, even as the Trump administration has goaded China and as both sides have traded insults. He has remained silent up until now. In a meeting with Spain's Prime Minister today, Pedro Sanchez, he talked about how China's development had come about due to hard work and self-reliance, and that China would never fear what he described as unjustified suppression. China has certainly offered repeatedly to engage and talk, but it has said that it needs to be done with respect. It's very difficult, given the conditions right now, for either side to engage. But, China's not waiting around either. It is trying to shore up alliances and partnerships with other countries. As I mentioned, President Xi is meeting with Spain's Prime Minister today. They are trying to forge closer economic ties. President Xi is also on a three-nation visit to Southeast Asia next week, to Vietnam, Cambodia and Malaysia. They are going to be talking about a coordinated response, and President Xi will also be looking for support from these countries. At the same time, though, we do know that some of them are negotiating on their own with Washington, and those are talks that China is essentially out of.
Patrick Falk there in Singapore, and China announced its retaliation after Chinese stock markets closed and the major Chinese markets ended the day higher. And now I want to give you a look at the U.S. markets ahead of the start to trading this hour. A bit of a mixed bag there as we take a look. Actually, there's quite a bit of red there in the futures category. The opening bell is going to be at 9:30 Eastern time. So far, there have been no real big moves in response to China's retaliation. retaliation. This is the final session in what's been quite an extraordinary week on Wall Street. It began with staggering sell-offs on Monday and Tuesday that were followed by a surge on Wednesday mid-afternoon when Donald Trump made his surprise decision to pause the most extreme of the global tariffs and ended the day down yesterday. It's just been all over the map. So we'll continue to watch that as the final day of trading kicks off in less than a half hour here on CBC News Network. So stay with us for that. Obviously, the White House remains focused on what happens in the markets as well. U.S. President Donald Trump and his top officials are trying to put a positive spin on the turmoil that we've seen this week. And Katie Simpson is tracking that part of the story as officials there are promising potentially dozens of new trade deals.
There'll be a transition cost and transition problems, but in the end, it's going to be a beautiful thing.
China's tariff rate jumping from 125% to 145% after the White House confirmed a previously announced 20% tariff would remain in place.
We'll see what happens with China. We would love to be able to work a deal.
As the fight between Beijing and Washington intensifies, the EU announced a pause in its retaliation plan.
We want to negotiate. We want to talk.
Trump's team claims it now has 75 countries calling in to reach a deal.
I'm not sure we could ever have enough time in the day to talk to all these countries because they want to talk and they want to talk now.
One Trump official says they expect over the next 3 to 4 weeks that the White House will be a high-traffic zone for world leaders. But nothing like this has ever been done before, and trade deals typically take years to negotiate. All of this remains uncharted territory.
Katie Simpson in Washington. Now, one of Trump's top trade officials says that he has already had trade talks with Vietnam, and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says he will be meeting today with Taiwanese officials. So just part of that storyline as it continues to bubble up, and the Trump administration tries to make these one-on-one deals with various countries around the world. We're watching all of it for you. And of course, back in our country, the escalating global trade war has Mark Carney back in Prime Minister mode today. He has returned to Ottawa and is pausing his campaign for the third time.
In Canada, there are tariffs that remain in place. Those tariffs are threatening our families, our workers, and our businesses. And while they have been imposed under different pretenses, they all are unjustified, unwarranted, and misguided.
Carney in Brampton yesterday before heading back to Ottawa, and Carney says he will meet with his Canada-U.S. Relations Cabinet Committee this morning. That is starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so a little less than an hour from now. And Rafi Boudjikanian is in our Parliamentary Bureau this morning. Rafi, Mark Carney is certainly catching a lot of heat for this decision. A little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't, hey?
Yeah, Chris, I mean, there's criticism coming from the Conservative Party, which has taken to saying in the last couple of days, Mark Carney keeps presenting himself as the guy who can control Donald Trump while really nobody can. And then he's gotten a bit of a warning from the U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, a couple of days ago, saying that countries that still have countermeasures imposed on the U.S. should be thinking twice, naming Canada in particular, suggesting there's a lot of election bluster going on in this country. Certainly, politicians, including Carney, have brought up Trump a lot on the campaign trail. Here was Carney again to his supporters last night in Hamilton.
I'm back on Trump, I'm afraid. He won't go away. He will not go away. And that steadily deepening integration with the United States, that is also over. And, you know, this is a tragedy. We didn't ask for this. It's a tragedy, but it's a new reality. And the question is, how do we respond as a nation? We're responding with purpose and with force.
And as you pointed out, this is triple deja vu now for Carney. It's the third time in as many weeks he has paused his campaign to come back to Ottawa and be prime minister and deal with Trump. On the first week, it was because of those surprise tariffs. On week 2, it was right before April 2nd, that date that the Trump administration had long telegraphed would be when the auto tariffs would kick in. This week, there doesn't seem to be an obvious reason for it. Even Carney himself acknowledged that that pause button that Trump hit on higher rates of tariffs has no impact on Canada because it was designed for the countries that were already being hit with that 10% baseline, which Canada was not a part of. There are no new tariffs on Canada this week that we know of. A cynic might say that appearing to be prime ministerial has worked wonders for Carney and the Liberals during this campaign, and so he might be leaning into that.
Well, and no matter how you slice it, at the end of the day, Mark Carney is off the campaign trail today, but Pierre Poilievre is firmly in place. And let's take a look live together at St. Catharines. This is where Pierre Poilievre was scheduled to speak right at 9 o'clock. Obviously, he's running a little bit late here as it is past 9 a.m. Eastern time right now. But we will continue to watch this shot for you live here in the newsroom, and we'll take you back there as soon as he starts to speak. And in the meantime, Rafi, why don't you bring us up to speed on not just where Pierre Poilievre is going to be, but the other major party leaders as well.
Sure, let's just dwell a little bit more on Pierre Poilievre because we now have an idea of what he'll be talking about. The Conservatives have sent their news release to the media, and he is going to be focused on the economy. It looks like he's going to re-announce a bunch of measures that he has already talked about in this campaign, whether that's the income tax cut he's talked about or hiring 350,000 construction workers. They're repackaging all of this as Canada's economic action plan, though, and if that language seems familiar to you, I guess there's a lot of déjà vu this morning. It's what the Conservatives called their suite of measures in 2008 when Stephen Harper was in charge and when they had to get Canada out of that recession. So there's a bit of a reclaiming of the mantle going on in terms of, who did get Canada out of the recession, because, of course, Mark Carney was the governor of the Central Bank of Canada, and that's something he has tried to take a lot of credit for in the eyes of the public. And then we know that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, he is also back in Ottawa this morning. He's supposed to speak at a progressive summit run by the Broadbent Institute. As for the Yves-François Blanchet Bloc Québécois, they will be in La Salle Verdun, one of those rare Montreal ridings that party actually holds, Chris.
All right, Rafi Boudjikanian there in Ottawa. Sorry to do this, buddy, but you're going to have to wait right where you are as we wait for Pierre Poilievre to come and speak to the nation. We'll carry that live.
I'll be standing by.
Yes, I know you will be. And we can take one more look at St. Catharines right now as we continue to look and wait for Pierre Poilievre to come to that microphone. That should happen any minute now, so keep it locked here on CBC News Network, and we'll take you back to that scene in just a second. But in the meantime, the main focus of the campaign has, of course, been, as Rafi was saying, the trade war with the United States. But the leaders of some Canadian communities hardest hit by climate change feel that some issues have gone ignored. And dozens of mayors and councillors from across the country have signed an open letter released just this morning asking federal leaders to take action on climate change and the economy. Brett Ruskin is looking into that this morning.
This letter looks at what it calls bold but achievable goals for federal politicians should they get elected during this campaign. It looks at things like a national east-west-north clean energy grid, a national high-speed rail network, increasing the amount of housing available by creating 2 million new energy-efficient and affordable homes, creating a retrofit program to improve and increase the energy efficiency of existing homes, making them easier to cool in the summer, easier to heat in the winter, as well as a climate resiliency and response program and fund to help during the next climate emergency. Canada certainly has seen its share of climate emergencies over the last couple of years, whether it's hurricanes that hit here on the east coast, wildfires farther out on the west coast, and likewise this letter, this open letter, has signatories all across the country as well. Mayors and councillors who say that the main topic of discussion during this campaign has understandably been the relationship between Canada and the United States, but that there should be room made for additional topics of discussion that center around climate change. Here is the mayor of Jasper, Alberta, one of the signatories to this letter.
This is a perfect opportunity to focus on that other existential threat to communities, to our economy, and to our very lives, which is the threat from climate change. We have taken advantage of this opportunity to draw those matters to the attention of political leaders and to Canadians that we still have another issue to deal with.
Again, this letter hopes that federal politicians address what it calls the urgent need to act on climate change. It has been a topic of discussion at previous campaigns, previous years, talking about kind of the national discussion around climate change. The signatories to this open letter hope that it once again emerges as one of the main topics of discussion during this ongoing campaign. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
Here's what else you should know as you start your Friday morning. Solo dining is becoming more popular, and today's episode of The Current looks at how eating out alone could reflect a cultural shift towards autonomy. Matt Galloway spoke with a psychologist about the growing trend. That's on The Current this morning, everywhere you get your podcasts. And new online this morning, a pro golfer's April Fool's joke turned into a heartfelt offer for an 8-year-old PEI boy awaiting a heart transplant. So here's the story. South Korean golfer Ben On jokingly offered free tickets to the Masters on X. But when Maverick Bishop's father replied with his son's photo, saying how much it would mean, the pro golfer offered to make the deal legit. And that full story is online for you and on the CBC News app as well. And in case you missed it, a new category is coming to the Oscars, Best Stunt Design. The category will be introduced in 2027 for the 100th anniversary of the award ceremony. We've got all those details on our website as well. Now, here's a pint of Canadian patriotism for your Friday. Dozens of craft breweries across Canada are teaming up to produce IPAs that use 100% Canadian ingredients. The campaign is called Glorious and Free in response to the U.S. tariffs and threats of annexation. Ottawa-based Dominion City Brewing launched the campaign to support the industry. More than 40 breweries have signed on, with a significant portion of the profits going to the charity of their choice.
I think that the value-added portion of elevating other community members, showing that, we have a strong agricultural base, an industrial base, a lot of skilled labor, that Canada is glorious and free and a really strong country.
You've heard elbows up, maybe this is suds up. Ingredients like hops have largely been imported from the U.S. and Europe for decades. The Glorious and Free campaign provides an all-Canadian list of suppliers to participating breweries. I'm Chris Glover. You're watching CBC Morning Live. We are now more than halfway through the federal election campaign, and as Rafi Boudjikanian was reporting off the top of the show, Liberal leader Mark Carney is off the campaign trail today. He's meeting with his cabinet committee on Canada-U.S. relations, and that is happening next hour. I want to bring in chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton now. She's back in Ottawa after her trip to Halifax. Rosie, thanks for hopping on the show. 2 days in a row. Love it.
Yeah, no problem.
So here we go with Mark Carney having this political calculation here to put on his prime minister hat. Walk us through your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear with the audience. He is always prime minister, right? Whether he is campaigning or whether he is having this cabinet meeting, it's kind of what he's doing with it at the moment. And for whatever reason, he believes that right now he needs to pull off the trail, gather together with his Canada-U.S. cabinet committee, and sort of assess where we are at the end of a chaotic and at times perplexing week. Of course, Canada was not hit with those reciprocal tariffs in the first place, so the pause didn't apply to us. But it's fair to say also that the markets are, completely unstable, that this throws the Canadian economy into question as well as the worldwide economy, that this retaliation by China, for instance, just today against the U.S. for their tariffs is going to cause pain inside this country and others. So I would imagine that this is the beginning of sort of assessing that in that committee. The other piece of it is, as you've heard from Mark Carney, he agreed with the president that the next prime minister needs to begin some sort of broader negotiation about what the relationship looks like going forward. And we've seen other countries and blocs like the European Union say that they are not going to impose counter tariffs right now. So is there a conversation to be had around how long counter tariffs should stay on once this election is over? There is no doubt, though, just to be clear, Chris, that Mark Carney is taking advantage of this position that he's in as prime minister. By stepping off the trail and doing this work today, he is making a choice. And some might perceive it to be that of a front-runner campaign to do something that's not very risky. And I know Conservatives are particularly frustrated with the fact that this is now the third time he's done that.
Absolutely, the third time, and some are saying that it's too late in the sense that it happened, today and not a couple days ago, and others are wondering why he paused at all, as you mentioned, the third time here now. And also you mentioned the markets. We just saw that those officially now open, so we will continue to watch that part of the storyline very closely as well. We're also waiting for Pierre Poilievre to speak at a news conference in St. Catharines, so I want to shift over to him because obviously we've been talking a lot about crowd sizes in relation to Pierre Poilievre, those big, loud, large rallies that he has been holding. And I know that came up with the At Issue panel last night as well.
Yeah, so a couple things with those rallies. They seem to be of a great importance to Mr. Poilievre. He brings them up more often than reporters, points to them as a sign of growing success and momentum inside the party. They are certainly an indication of his popularity within the Conservative Party and the excitement that he generates. Whether they are a sign of something broader in terms of broad Canadian support, I think is really up for debate and discussion, given the kinds of movement that we're seeing in the polls. This comes, at a time when Mr. Poilievre is also facing criticism about how he's handling the media and how many questions and lack of follow-up questions he's taking from the media. Again, that is an attempt, of course, to remove risk and try and make sure that there are not hard-hitting questions that foul up Mr. Poilievre, although his camp also says that this is also about making sure that reporters who are not part of the press gallery, not part of the Ottawa bubble, local reporters and other quote-unquote non-mainstream media also get an opportunity to ask him questions. So I think both of those things can be true, but he's been criticized for that this week. And this focus on rallies at the same time as there are people, or at least a group of people, who showed up at a rally wearing sweatshirts saying, "Don't believe the polls," sort of, raises some questions about what's going on in terms of the campaign's perception of success. It also can, I think, derail some of the important policy issues that Mr. Poilievre is putting forward, whether it be on crime or, again, today talking more about measures for the economy. Getting bogged down in that kind of stuff, probably not great for the third week of a campaign.
Well, and you also talked about that moment that he's having with reporters on the campaign trail. We all watched live together right here on CBC Morning Live earlier in the week when CTV's Judy Trin was trying to shout a question at Pierre Poilievre. That dramatic moment playing out live right here on TV. So certainly you and your team, I would imagine, have more than a few things that you could talk about this weekend on Rosemary Barton Live. What can we expect?
Well, this is kind of the weird week of the campaign, I would say, where, nothing really dramatic has happened. Nothing has substantially changed in any way. What might happen next week, though, could change things, and that is the French and English language debates. There's a lot of hope, both inside the Bloc Québécois and the Conservative Party, that this could be a moment for their leaders to get a bit of momentum and attention and really try and attack Mark Carney, who is not very well practiced in these kinds of situations. So could that be enough to swing things around? I'm not sure. It's late in the campaign, but that will be an important moment. And it'll be a really important moment for Canadians, of course, who can watch this and sort of assess how they're responding to things. And I think what makes them good leaders, which has become such a big part of this campaign. So that's what I'll be looking ahead to next week. And then we're in the home stretch, Chris.
Smart stuff. All right, Rosemary Barton in Ottawa. Thank you so much, Rosie.
Thank you. Thanks.
And as Rosie and I were just saying, Pierre Poilievre is expected to speak any minute now in St. Catharines. We can show you the scene there live of what it looks like right now. We're continuing to watch this scene right here on CBC News Network. Stay with us. North American markets have now opened, and we are looking at the Dow. It is down today, and we can also look at the TSX as the Canadian main index has also opened up slightly after ending the day down yesterday. We're watching the markets very closely as the U.S. trade war continues to have ripple effects right around the global economy. And Anis Hadari is live in Calgary watching all of this very closely. What are you expecting to see on the markets today?
Chris, as the markets have opened, things are pretty flat. The TSX is up, as we saw there, but honestly, barely would be a word that I might use, less than 1%. The Dow Jones down a smidge, but it's still pretty flat right now. It seems like global trade is really the words of the day for both Wall and Bay Street. Markets, some of them have been dropping slightly as well, although NASDAQ is creeping up and down. U.S. Treasuries and bonds are creeping back up. All of this has to do with everything we've been hearing out of the United States really over the past few days. We're seeing what seems to be a bit of a broad pullback from American assets, and of course, so many of the markets around the world are tied to the U.S. And this might seem like it doesn't mean very much for those of you watching at home, but one thing that you might might catch your eye is that as these markets are sort of creeping up and down, the U.S. dollar is dropping quite a bit as well, and that's where we're really seeing that the markets don't have a lot of confidence in America, to put it bluntly. That can sometimes show up as though the Canadian dollar is going up. It doesn't mean that the Canadian dollar is doing better, or that the euro is doing better, or that the Japanese yen is doing better. It means the U.S. dollar is doing poorly. And as we can see that red on the Dow Jones Industrial Index right now, the markets are not plunging like they have in previous days, but they don't seem to be very happy right now, at least if they were a person, Chris.
Yeah, buckle up. It has been quite a wild ride on the markets, certainly, kind of all over the map, really. You talked about the dollar down in the States, the bond market sell-off that we saw earlier. It's just been intense to watch. And I know that you're also keeping your eye on what's going on in the Asian markets, because while the reciprocal tariffs for most of the world were dropped, we know that China's has gone up, and on the U.S., and the U.S. is on China's gone up as well. Now, what are you watching for in terms of the Asian markets?
Well, so most of the Asian markets had not a great day after China announced that it was going to raise its tariffs on American products to 125%. And so we saw drops in many Asian markets as a result. When Japan opened today, big dive there. South Korea down as well. The Shanghai markets closed pretty flat, but overall we're not seeing a lot of optimism in Asian markets, at least as far as investors go. Of course, one thing that we have learned with a global trade war, especially between the two biggest economies in the world, the United States and China, is that politicians from either country saying anything in the course of the day could send markets reeling. So Asian markets have closed for the day, for the most part. What we'll be watching for now is what happens on American markets as both China and the U.S. Have their tit for tat when it comes to tariffs.
No kidding. The American markets and, of course, the Canadian one as well. Anis, I know you'll be watching all of it for us throughout the day. Anis Hadari in our Calgary newsroom. Thanks, Anis.
You're welcome.
wave of job cuts by the U.S. Health and Human Services Department is threatening to put tens of thousands of healthcare workers out of work south of the border. But some Canadian agencies see this as an opportunity to fill a shortage of doctors and other health workers in our country. Now there's a push to get provinces to quickly reach out and recruit American physicians. Georgie Smythe explains.
Crowds of laid-off healthcare workers line up outside federal buildings as promised cuts to jobs and spending take effect.
As part of President Trump's DOGE workforce reduction initiative, we're going to streamline HHS.
But those losses could be Canada's gain, with agencies here seeing a surge of inquiries from doctors thinking of relocating north.
There's no question that U.S. physicians are interested in coming to Canada.
But Canadian authorities need to turn that interest into offers, she says.
And so if you can demonstrate that you're a province where there's less paperwork, where people can seek out research if they're interested, where they will be supported to do the work that they really feel passionate about, that weighs a lot when someone's thinking about where.
Taking you live to St. Catharines right now, where Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, is speaking. Let's listen in live together.
To deliver change. We've got Baz Slemmers, we've got Tony Baldinelli, Dean Allison, and of course Fred Davies, whom you've met. And they're here because they want to bring change to Canada, to bring back Canada's promise so that hard work gets a great life in a beautiful, affordable house on a safe street, protected by brave troops under our proud flag. They're here because the choice in this election, of course, is that after the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, we can't afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change in government so Conservatives can axe taxes, build homes, liberate our resources, and build our economy strong enough to stand up to the Americans for a change. That is the choice in this election. And no better place to symbolize that choice than right here in Welland at Ontario Shipyards. For 35 years, this 100% Canadian-owned company has led the way on shipbuilding and repair, creating thousands of jobs and strengthening our maritime borders. The ships they build and repair allow products to get to market. And it's great to be joined by so many of the workers who do that incredible, skillful work. There's a lot of brain power in this room today. Here we are today near the Welland Canal. This great Canadian project united our country. The first two phases were built before Confederation even happened, as the British colonies took their first tentative steps to join economies together. The third phase of the canal was done under then Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald. And its fourth phase was begun by Conservative Prime Minister Robert Borden. Now, the reason I bring that up is I ask myself, could we actually build the Welland Canal today? I wonder. Here we are a century and a half later. We have much more technology, bigger, more powerful machines. We don't rely on the muscular power of animals to move heavy rocks and aggregates. We have these incredible machines. But something tells me it would actually take longer to get it built today, not because of our builders or our companies or the machines they use, but because of the enormous bureaucracy that would stand in the way of getting it done. But today, more than ever, we need to start building. And we've done it before. We can do it again. We built the great Canadian Pacific Railway. We cleared the St. Lawrence Seaway, creating an H2O highway from basically Thunder Bay all the way to the Atlantic Ocean because of the ability to get things done. And we will be able to do things again. We've been hit with hardship in the past. Remember the great global economic crisis of 2008. During that time, our government took fast action under the leadership of then Prime Minister Stephen Harper. It was called the Economic Action Plan. There were some differences. Obviously, we went into that crisis strong. Our economy was growing. We had a budget surplus before the crisis hit. Food was affordable. So were homes. Taxes were lower. I know because I was serving as Prime Minister Harper's parliamentary secretary at the time. Later, I would go on to be his housing and jobs minister. And that was a time of rising wages and very laughably affordable housing costs. You could buy the average home in Canada then for $450,000. And the average rent was $900 on a one-bedroom. It almost seems hard to believe that that was only 10 years ago. We slashed red tape, simplified project applications, streamlined approvals, and the result is that things got built. The original Economic Action Plan built 30,000 projects, roads, bridges, water systems, port expansions, and more. 610,000 new jobs. We created a one-and-done rule. One project, one-page application form. One page, one environmental review. And after all these projects were done, the Environment Commissioner did not find a single environmental problem, even though all of that paperwork was supposedly meant to protect the environment. After a lost Liberal decade, with costs up and the economy down, sadly, this is no longer the case. After the
global financial crisis, the Conservative economic plan helped Canada to surmount this crisis. But now our economy is weak. Wages are going down and taxes are going up. The cost of living has exploded because of the Liberal taxes and spending. In 2008, that was not the case. The budget was balanced, taxes were going down, food and housing were affordable, and taxes were lower. I know that because I was there. I was the parliamentary secretary to Stephen Harper at the time, and later I was the minister responsible for jobs and housing. In that time, it cost half what it costs now to have a home. We kept taxes very low. We built homes. We kept our economy growing. We reduced paper burden, and we simplified the process for getting major projects approved. Projects were completed very quickly. A lot of different projects, bridges, highways, 600,000 jobs. It was an ambitious plan to address the situation, and that allowed us to come through the crisis. After the lost Liberal decade with costs up and our economy declining, unfortunately, that is no longer the case. So the question in this election with a slower economy is whether we should give the Liberals a fourth term to continue to do exactly the same thing with exactly the same MPs and Liberal ministers, or do we need a change with a new Conservative government that will cut taxes, unleash our resources, build homes, and strengthen our economy in relation to the United States. Today, we have the worst economic growth in Canada of the G7, the worst real estate situation, the worst family debt situation, and we have lost $500 million of investment that has been driven to the U.S.
Canada has had the worst economic growth in the G7. The worst housing price inflation in the G7, the worst household debt in the G7, and $500 billion of net investment has poured out of our country into the United States. No wonder Donald Trump wants the Liberals elected for a fourth term. Happily, Donald Trump doesn't get to choose our next Prime Minister. Canadians do, and they want change. They want change to turn the page. But unfortunately, Mr. Carney wants to stay on the Justin Trudeau's page. He supports every single policy that Trudeau put in place. He supported Trudeau in killing 16 major energy projects worth $176 billion. There are no new pipeline law, no new development law, C-69, their cap on Canadian energy, and their anti-development policies have driven $500 billion to the States. And Mr. Carney has publicly stated he wants to keep every single one of those policies. He will keep C-69, the no development law, keep the energy cap on Canadian oil and gas, and keep the industrial carbon tax that will drive jobs south. And after Justin Trudeau doubled our national debt, once again, at Mark Carney's advice, your tax bill has gone up too, to pay off the Liberal government's credit card. And now Mr. Carney is doubling down on the same failed Liberal policies. His ideological agenda will stifle development here in Canada, making us more dependent on the Americans than ever before. On energy, he and his Quebec lieutenant, the radical anti-energy activist Stephen Guilbeault, who was twice arrested for climbing up the CN Tower and then climbing onto the roof of the Alberta Premier's house, all to fight against energy. This is the guy that Mr. Carney has put in charge of Quebec. And Mr. Carney himself has said he wants to keep 80% of our fossil fuels in the ground. In the ground is where our wealth will remain if he becomes Prime Minister again after this election. This radical environmental agenda is dangerous and risky. Mr. Carney and the Liberals would deepen our weakness and push us further and downward towards recession. In fact, if you look at Mr. Carney, despite all the bragging he does about his resume, he's been wrong about every major economic issue of our time. He was wrong to support the carbon tax. He was wrong to oppose Canadian pipelines. He was wrong to say that inflation would not be a problem 5 years ago and encourage rampant money printing that led to mass misery in Canada and gave us 37% more food price inflation than they had in the States. Every important economic issue of our time has seen Mark Carney on the wrong side. And now he has no plan. A resume is not a plan. He hopes you don't notice that. In fact, Mark Carney's entire election strategy is to make you forget his record and the Liberal record of rising costs and crime and focus instead on his promise that he can handle Donald Trump. That's an actual quote from him. But so far, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Look at the reality. While the rest of the world is getting pauses on Trump's tariffs, there are more tariffs on Canada today than when Mark Carney became Prime Minister. Now, I'm not blaming Mr. Carney for that. He has no control over President Trump. But that's why he should stop promising that he does, because he can't. But what we need to do is focus on what we can control, and that means reversing the disastrous Liberal economic policies that he advised and Trudeau implemented with the help of all the Liberal ministers that are running for re-election for a fourth time. It's the same Liberal MPs, same Liberal ministers, same Liberal advisors with the same Liberal results. We need a change in government with a new Conservative leadership that has a Canada First economic action plan. It will be modeled in a lot of ways off the incredible success that Stephen Harper had in the 08-09 crisis. And that's why I'm rolling out that plan today. First, this plan includes tax relief. We will cut taxes on work, investment, home building, and energy to unleash production and paychecks here in Canada. We'll cut income taxes by 15% for the average worker to save a working couple almost $2,000. With more money in their pockets, Canadians will be able to spend at local businesses, boosting employment in restaurants, corner stores, and hotels. Furthermore, we will axe the federal sales tax on new homes to save you up to $65,000. And yesterday, I announced that we will work with municipalities to bring down local building taxes another $50,000 a home. The goal is to cut building taxes by $100,000 per home so that these great workers behind me today can afford a place to live. That will stimulate construction, meaning more trades jobs, and demand for Canada's lumber, which is being tariffed by Donald Trump. If we can build more homes here in Canada, we don't have to send our lumber to the Americans. We can create the logging jobs on our own turf. And to protect our auto workers, we'll axe the federal sales tax on Canadian-made automobiles to create more demand for our homemade cars and allow Canadians a more affordable set of wheels to get around. Conservatives will train 350,000 new apprentices over the next 5 years with an expanded union training and innovation program, and we'll restore the $4,000 apprenticeship grant that the Liberals cut. That means more good union jobs for our young people and more homes being built by our skilled tradespersons. The people that build the homes will be able to buy them as well. We'll also set up a Keeping Canadians Working Fund to provide emergency loans to manufacturers and others hit by the Trump tariffs, because we want to keep people in their jobs, earning paychecks, contributing to Canada. C'est pourquoi j'annonce aujourd'hui.
That's why I am announcing today a new economic action plan for Canada to put Canada first, to bring back prosperity and make life affordable again, make us independent of the United States. I've already announced that workers will keep more of their wages. I've announced tax cuts, a 15% tax cut. That will mean a $2,000 savings for an average couple working in Canada. Same thing for seniors. Two seniors with a pension of about $50,000 will be able to save $2,000. Thanks to that extra money, Canadians will be able to spend money in restaurants, creating jobs. We will also remove the GST on new homes and incentivize the municipalities to cut back their building costs, building charges, so that Canadians can save $100,000 on the cost of a new home. And to protect jobs in the auto sector, we will also eliminate GST on Canadian-made vehicles. Conservatives will train 350,000 new apprentices over the next 5 years so that we have the skills to build. By restoring the apprenticeship grant. More money in people's pockets, better paychecks, and more building. We will also introduce a jobs protection fund to save jobs in aluminum, steel, and the auto sectors, rather than seeing people lose their jobs because of the U.S. tariffs.
We need to cut taxes and build homes. And to do this, we need an ambitious plan to boost our productivity and grow our economy after the lost Liberal decade. My new Canada First Economic Action Plan will boost our economy by unlocking our resources, empowering our entrepreneurs, and unleashing our economy with realistic goal of generating more GDP. We'll also pass the Canada First Reinvestment Tax Cut, zero capital gains tax when you reinvest here in Canada. This will be like rocket fuel for our economy, causing money to pour back into factories, shipyards, new homes, business centers, and other places that generate paychecks for our people. All of these policies combined have been calculated to boost our GDP by $500 billion spread over the next 5 years. This calculation has been done by Philip Cross, the former Statistics Canada Chief Economic Analyst, and Dr. Tim Sargent, the former Senior ADM at Finance Canada, who now is practicing as a PhD economist. These two revered economists have calculated that these policies that I've announced of cutting taxes on investment, work, home building, and energy, plus repealing the anti-resource Liberal laws, will unlock $500 billion in additional GDP spread over the next 5 years. This is money that will go into the pockets of our workers. This will build our economy back and fortify it against the Americans. It will also generate new tax revenue to fund schools, hospitals, and most of all, our military, to make us more independent. We will do this by unlocking our resources. We'll create a national energy corridor for pipelines, transmission lines, rail lines, and other critical infrastructure. We will pre-approve projects through shovel-ready zones. We will unleash more production with a one-stop shop that safely and quickly approves resource projects with one-page application form, one environmental review, and a maximum of 1 year wait time to get things approved, with the goal being 6 months. This means roads, mines, LNG terminals, hydro projects, and nuclear power stations. We'll back LNG2, the major project in northwestern British Columbia, by allowing it to go ahead. This is tens of billions of dollars of new investment to ship Canadian gas over to Asia, displacing dirty coal. We'll back the Port of Churchill, shipping our wonderful petroleum projects. And we'll speed up the approval of Canada's incredible opportunity in the Ring of Fire, granting permits in only 6 months. We'll cut red tape by 25% and add a 2-for-1 rule that every new regulation must be met with the removal of 2 existing ones. The Canada First economic plan will be like rocket fuel for the Canadian economy. After a century after we built the Welland Canal, and more than a decade after the great global financial crisis that Stephen Harper weathered so well with the incredible help of the late Jim Flaherty, to whom we owe so much credit, we can do this again. We know that we can. We know that we can turn the page on the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy. We know that they don't deserve and we can't afford a 4th term. What we need is a change that puts our country first. A change
that will allow our economy to add another $500 billion to our GDP. According to economists that calculated the impact of the policies I've just announced. This is how we will strengthen our economy. We will be masters in our own home. We will be able to resist the economic recession caused by the U.S. and other countries. And we will be able to stand up to Donald Trump.
We're going to take back control of our economic destiny. And it is how we're going to supercharge Canada's economy. But let's not forget, the reason we want to supercharge our economy is not just so that economists sitting in lecture halls or accountants sitting in front of their spreadsheets can delight at impressive numbers. It's so that people's lives are better off. So that once again, these workers here get a nice house with a yard where kids can play, where they can have a nice dog, where the streets are safe, where the mortgage is paid off, where they're not stressed at night. They go to bed with their head hitting the pillow, feeling a sense of peace and calm, that they're on solid financial footing. That was the Canadian promise. C'était ça la promesse du Canada, que chacun qui
That was the promise of Canada, that everyone who works hard should have a great life in a great home that is affordable, in a safe community. That is the goal of the Canada First economic plan.
The Canada First economic action plan. That is the reason why we're marching forward with these great workers, is to bring back the promise of Canada, so that hard work gets them and all a great life in a beautiful house that they can afford, on a safe street, protected by brave troops under our proud flag. Canada First, for a change. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to questions. The first question will be from the phone line.
Ines Lombardo, Franco Press.
Oui, vas-y.
Please unmute, Ines.
Next question.
Matt Latour, My Broadcasting Corporation. You visited this region a number of times before the campaign, and now you're here during the election. Why is this such an important region to you?
Well, first of all, it's a great industrial heartland. People here, I find, have been working very hard. When I talk to our MPs and candidates in this region, they've been telling me that they go to the doorsteps and they have people literally crying on their shoulders. They're working nonstop. They're saving, they're scrimping, they're cutting back on their household expenses, and they still can't make it. Their kids are living in the home until their 30s. Crime is increasingly overtaking the streets. They're worried about drug addictions, and they want some hope. And that's why I'm here, to provide people with some hope and change. You know, after the lost Liberal decade of rising cost and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, we can't afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, green light home building, resource projects, bring our jobs home so we can stand up to the Americans with strength for a change. So So my message to the people across this region is have hope, because change is on the way. Thank you very much.
To the next question.
I'm Bill Sawchuk from the St. Catharines Standard. A question about the local candidate here in St. Catharines and his work with the anti-abortion folks in Florida. It was he called it the most important experience in his pro-life journey, and the Genocide Awareness Project graphically compared the victims of abortion to victims of other atrocities, such as Jews in the Holocaust. Part of the platform, or part of the party policy, is to allow a free vote in the Commons when there's enough interest in it. Is that something you're willing to promise him?
I can guarantee you there will be no laws restricting abortion passed when I'm Prime Minister. For 20 years, the policy of the Conservative Party has been that there will be no restrictions brought in on a woman's right to choose. It's been in our policy since it was adopted by our party members in the year 2004. So this is a 21-year policy adopted by our members and upheld at all of our subsequent conventions. So there will be no laws or other restrictions imposed on a woman's right to decide to do with her body as she wishes, and that is something that I am guaranteeing to you and to all Canadians.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je peux vous
Yes,
garantir
I can guarantee you that my government will never allow any change to be made to the legislation. There will be no restrictions on a woman's right to abortion. That is their choice, and they will continue to make the decision. That is the Conservative policy that's been on the books for 21 years. Conservative members adopted that policy at a convention in 2004, and it will also be part of my election platform, so it's an absolute guarantee that there will be no law passed to restrict a woman's right to make her own choice.
We'll go to the next question.
I should just add that that will also be that policy which has been in place in our party policy book for 21 years will also be reiterated explicitly in my election platform. Thank you.
Hi there, Marina von Stackelberg with CBC News. Stephen Harper's former director of communications says, quote, blowing a 25-point lead and being 10 points down is campaign malpractice at the highest level. Is it campaign malpractice?
No, I answered that question 2 weeks ago. Liberals and lobbyists want to focus, want me to stop talking about high food prices. Well, I'm not going to do that, because single mothers shouldn't be going to bed hungry, worried about how they're going to feed their kids in the morning. They want me to stop talking about the doubling housing costs during the lost Liberal decade. I'm not going to stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about the rampaging crime that's overtaking our streets and the overdose crisis Liberals caused that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. I will not stop talking about that either. After the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, we can't afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources, lock up criminals, and bring home a safe, affordable country for our people. Thank you.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Comme j'ai déjà répondu à cette question il y a 2
I answered that question 2 weeks ago. Lobbyists and Liberals want me to stop talking about the rising cost of food and housing, but I won't stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about crime and our weak economy. Again, I will not stop talking about those issues. I will continue to show that we have hope for Canadians, that they will be able to buy food and housing that is affordable in safe communities, because after the lost Liberal decade, we cannot elect them to a fourth term. We need a change with a new Conservative government that will cut taxes, unleash our resources, build homes, to bring back jobs to Canada, and to be able to stand up to the U.S. threats with strength for a change.
From the phone line, and this will be the last question.
Thank you.
From Ines Lombardo at Franco Press. Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre. Est-ce que vous pouvez
Hello,
m'entendre?
Mr. Poilievre.
Très bien, merci beaucoup.
Très bien. J'aimerais savoir pourquoi vous ne preniez que 4 questions des journalistes.
I'd like to know why you're only taking 4 questions from journalists. Are you afraid?
Est-ce que j'ai quoi? Non.
Est-ce que vous avez peur?
Are you afraid?
Pourquoi
No.
vous prenez aussi peu de questions par jour?
Why do you take so few questions each day?
La réponse est non.
The
Et
answer
response
is no.
We're here today talking about the choice in the next election. So after the lost Liberal decade of, I'll respond in French first, and then, sorry, one of the other journalists was asking for English, so we'll do both. Après la décennie perdue des
After the
libéraux,
lost Liberal decade,
où le crime et le coût de la
where
vie
crime and the cost of living are rising,
est en baisse,
and the economy is
dépendance des
declining and dependent on the United States, we cannot offer them a 4th term. It has to change with a new Conservative government to build homes, cut taxes, unleash our natural resources, and strengthen our economy for a change. That is the choice in this election. And I know that Mr. Carney would like everyone to forget about the last 10 years. Why? Because it's a horrible Liberal record. They just want to distract people, avoid addressing the real issues, and he's the one that's not really responding to Canadians. I am responding with a message of hope, talking about real change to restore Canada's promise where every Canadian who works hard can have a great life in a great home, on a safe street, under our proud flag.
In English, thank you very much for the question. As I said at the outset, the message is that after the lost Liberal decade of rising crime and costs and a falling economy under America's thumb, we can't afford a 4th Liberal term. We need a new government that will bring change and hope to the people, that they can again earn a great living and live in a nice house that they can afford on a safe street under our proud flag. Now, Liberals don't want us talking about those. They want us to, Mark Carney wants us to forget about the last 10 years and his role in bringing about the lost Liberal decade. He doesn't want to answer questions about why he stuffs his corporate cash in overseas tax havens, so he's in hiding from that as well. He doesn't want to answer questions about his connection to the regime in Beijing, from which he got a $250 million loan from his company only 6 months ago while he was economic advisor to Justin Trudeau, an incredible conflict of interest. He doesn't want to answer questions about the ongoing conflicts he has with tens of millions of dollars potentially invested in a company that has money in overseas tax havens, owes a debt to the Chinese Communist government, and has countless other conflicts that he will not reveal to Canadians. That's why he is not responding to questions. I'm here sharing a message of hope and change to put people back, give people back the Canadian promise. That's what we're here for. Let's put Canada first for a change. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This concludes our press conference today.
Okay, if you're just joining us, welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. My name is Natasha Fatah, and we have been taking you live to St. Catharines, Ontario, where Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre has been making a campaign announcement about a new economic action plan and also answering questions from reporters. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian has also been listening in from Ottawa. So, Rafi, what did we hear from the Conservative leader?
Well, for the first time since the first week of the campaign, he accepted a question from CBC News this morning, and that was about the criticism he's faced from Ontario PC campaign strategist Corey Tanaik, who had accused them of campaign malpractice for blowing the really large lead the Conservatives had just a couple of months ago over the Liberals poised to form majority government, according to opinion polls at the time. Poilievre denied that's the case. He said that he's not going to stop talking about the economy, about housing affordability issues, the very bread and butter issues that did propel the party ahead of the polls before Donald Trump became such a huge factor in this election campaign. We also heard him field a question about his local candidate in St. Catharines, Bas Sluijmers, who apparently had been part of a pro-life campaign that he had called life-changing, had talked about an exhibit which compared unborn fetuses to victims of genocide, like the Jewish Holocaust. Poilievre was asked if he would tolerate private members' bill being put forward by a pro-life member such as Mr. Sluijmers in the House of Commons if he were Prime Minister. He reiterated the 21-year-old conservative policy of not passing any laws restricting abortion. However, that did not quite answer the part of the question about whether he would accept a member to present a private member's bill. That part he didn't really touch. He was also asked, why are you taking only 4 questions per news conference? Are you afraid? That was the last question he got. He said, no, that's not the case. And he was there to talk about what he and the Conservatives have termed the lost Liberal decade, which was also the theme of his news conference today. He didn't really announce anything new. He reiterated the economic policies the Conservatives have put forward so far, like the 15% income tax cut or the idea of hiring 350,000 construction workers or the idea of canceling the industrial carbon tax. Poilievre sort of presented these as packaged Canada Economic Action Plan, and that's language that's deliberately hearkening to 2008 and the recession and former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Economic Action Plan at the time to get Canada out of it. A bit of a reclaiming of the mantle, if you will, of the 2008 crisis and how Canada did manage to get out of it because, of course, Mark Carney was the Central Bank of Canada governor at the time, and he has tried reminding voters, at any opportunity he has about that. Poilievre essentially saying, hold on a minute, the Conservatives were in charge at the time, Stephen Harper was in charge at the time, not you, which is kind of the same message that Stephen Harper himself had a couple of nights ago when he introduced Poilievre at that large rally in Edmonton.
And you mentioned Mark Carney. Mark Carney, the Liberal Party leader, is not going to be on the campaign trail today. So where is he?
Yep, he's come back to Ottawa again, put the Prime Minister hat on again, ostensibly to deal with the tariff news this week, that pause that Donald Trump announced on the higher rates of tariffs for countries that were being hit with that baseline 10%. Group that does not include Canada, to be clear. Carney has again brought up Trump over and over on the campaign trail, including last night at his rally in Hamilton.
I'm back on Trump, I'm afraid. He won't go away. He will not go away. And that steadily deepening integration with the United States, that is also over. And, this is a tragedy. We didn't ask for this. It's a tragedy, but it's a new reality. And the question is, how do we respond as a nation? We're responding with purpose and with force.
Now, Carney, the first week when he paused this campaign to come back to Ottawa and be Prime Minister, it was when those surprise tariffs were announced by Trump. The second week, last week, was to deal with the auto tariffs, which Canadians were expecting because the U.S. administration had long talked about April 2nd as the date those would hit. This third week, again, there is nothing new going on with Canada, though markets are, of course, quite volatile. So a cynic might say that perhaps Mr. Carney is leaning into prime ministerial mode because it's been helpful to him on this campaign. That being said, he is expected to be in this U.S.-Canada Cabinet Relations Committee meeting, which was supposed to start at the top of this hour. We know that Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, Defense Minister Bill Blair, as well as Industry Minister Anita Anand have already gone into the Cabinet meeting room, and we're waiting to see what comes out of that.
Absolutely, and we'll bring those comments to our audience live as soon as they get underway. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa. Thank you, Rafi.
You're welcome.
And as Rafi mentioned, Mark Carney is pausing his campaign trail for the third time to address the latest in the tariff turmoil. Today, he is chairing that meeting with the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations and National Security. Let's dig a bit deeper into that with John Manley. He's a former Deputy Prime Minister. He also served as the Minister of Finance and Foreign Affairs. Mr. Manley, thank you so much for patiently waiting as we were taking that live event, and again for your time today, sir.
My pleasure, Natasha.
So, Mr. Manley, Mark Carney is back in the prime ministerial sort of position today. He's not on the campaign trail. This meeting is taking place with his cabinet. What would you want to see on that agenda?
Well, the big thing today, since as we know, the announcement, the most recent announcement, shall we say, from Donald Trump, there seems to be a new one every day. Most recent one didn't directly affect Canada. However, the escalation of the trade war between the United States and China does affect Canada. It'll affect the entire global economy. And I think that we're going to be wanting to see whether there's any renewed response in the face of the turmoil that Mr. Trump is causing the world. It's commonly said when a rising tide lifts all boats, a falling tide also lowers all boats, and the impact on our global economy and therefore the Canadian economy is going to be quite profound.
Let's talk about what's happened this week. So President Donald Trump did press pause on those so-called reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries. But Canada didn't really benefit from that because we're still being hit with tariffs on steel and aluminum, some auto parts, and anything that's non-CUSMA compliant. What can this cabinet committee do to push back on this?
Well, first of all, we didn't benefit from the pause in the reciprocal tariffs because he didn't impose the so-called reciprocal tariffs on Canada. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of back to the day before, if you like. So it's head spinning just to keep track of it all. But I think that there are very few steps that we can really physically take in Canada. The imposition of retaliatory tariffs is the one thing that I think the public expects us to do. And those have to be imposed with a great deal of care. I mean, we all accept that imposing a tariff is a tax on your own people, because ultimately it's paid by the consumers. Therefore, just because somebody else is being stupid doesn't mean we have to be just as stupid as they are. So I quite see the notion that we really nailed Kentucky bourbon. If you don't get your bourbon, you can always buy Scotch. I mean, there are other alternatives. In fact, there's even Canadian-made bourbon. But there are some things that we need. We should not be imposing tariffs on those. I think the government's trying very hard to be targeted in how they retaliate. After that, there's really not much we can do. We can expect a negotiation of the USMCA, but one has to ask, what should our preconditions be for that? If they were to ask me, I'd say I wouldn't even go into that negotiation until the tariffs on steel and aluminum, on auto parts and automobiles, on energy and on potash are removed. In other words, we go back to the USMCA as it was prior to January 20th before we even begin a further discussion, because all of those tariffs imposed on Canadian and Mexican goods are in violation of the agreement that Donald Trump himself signed and proclaimed as the best trade deal ever. Why would we negotiate something with somebody that's already in breach?
But nevertheless, here we are, Mr. Manley. I mean, like you said, it's enough to make your head spin. It's difficult to keep track of things. And right now, not only are we engaged in our own tariff, I don't know if we should call it trade war, but we're in a tariff situation with the United States at this point. And then the two biggest economies in the world are definitely in the midst of a global trade war between China and the U.S. It's very difficult to figure out, okay, like you said, someone's being stupid, quote unquote, we don't want to be stupid. We need to use the rules of engagement that have been in place for dozens and dozens of years. We need to use the apparatuses and the institutions that already exist. But the main person who's escalating this trade war is not engaging by the rules. So what do we do?
Well, I think first of all, there are going to be effects on us. It's going to slow our economy. Household and corporate incomes are going to go down. Government revenues are going to go down. So when we're in the midst of an election campaign, quite honestly, as one voter, I don't want to hear them promising more things, more tax cuts, more giveaways, more spending. They're not going to have the money to do it because the restrictions on government revenues are going to be taking effect because of the slowing of the economy. So we need to be talking about what we have to do to build the resilience of the Canadian economy. We cannot upend 40 years of our economic policy, which has been based upon the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement that came into force in 1989, which saw greater continental integration. We can't reverse that overnight. So it's going to take us some time. We're going to have leaders that tell Canadians the truth, which is we're going to have to do things we were probably not planning to do otherwise. First of all, you go to your strengths. We are strong in energy resources. We've got to get them out of the ground and into international markets because, quite honestly, we need the cash. Canada needs the money. We're going to have to build more east-west links, both pipelines, electricity corridors, transmission corridors. All of these things have to be done, and they have to be done quickly. We're going to have to find ways to accelerate our approval processes, to reduce the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that interferes with us getting things down. We're going to have to look at how we attract investment to Canada. We have to be a low-cost jurisdiction to do business because we no longer have that unfettered access to the U.S. market that's been part of our investment thesis, if you like, about Canada for all these years. There's a lot to do.
Okay. John Manley, always good to speak with you, sir. Thank you again so much for your time.
Not at all. Thank you, Natasha.
It's our pleasure. The federal leader debates are taking place next week, and CBC News will bring you live coverage from Montreal. The French debate, moderated by Radio-Canada's Patrice Roy, will take place on Wednesday, April the 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern. It will be broadcast live with simultaneous interpretation on CBC News Network and live streamed on the CBC News app, CBC's YouTube channel, GEM, and CBCNews.ca. Now, the English language debate is going to be moderated by TV Ontario's Steve Paikin on Thursday, April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, again on CBC TV, CBC News Network, and everywhere you stream CBC News. The English debate will also be rebroadcast at midnight Eastern, that's 9 p.m. Pacific, on CBC News Network. Okay, and speaking of CBC News Network, we are going to be free for you to watch for the remainder of the federal election campaign. You can watch Canada's #1 news network through your cable provider on CBC GEM, CBCNews.ca, and on the CBC News app. Sorry, that means there's a lot of CBC News out there. Okay, we'll continue to track everything happening in the election, but of course the other big story is the tariffs, so let's turn to that. Because the uncertainty continues to rattle global stock markets due to Donald Trump's wide-ranging trade war. Now, much of the focus is on the escalating tariff war between the world's two largest economies with no end in sight. Just today, China increased its tariffs on U.S. goods to 125%. It is in response to Donald Trump's tariffs yesterday that boosted duties on Chinese goods to 145%. The back and forth in Trump's overall trade war has caused big swings on the stock markets all week. To bring us up to speed on what's going on with the markets right now, we're joined by CBC's business reporter Anis Hadari in Calgary. So, Anis, what's going on right now?
When you describe it as back and forth, that's sort of what we're seeing on the markets as they've been open for just a little while this morning. A few of the indexes that we typically look at are dropping slightly, but nothing like what we've seen earlier in the week. If we look at the Dow Jones Industrial Index, it's only down maybe not even an entire percentage point here, less than half a percentage point. The TSX up a little bit, but it was down a little bit before. We're seeing sort of, I saw it described as a whipsaw online earlier today, and that's kind of what we're feeling right now. It's not whiplash like we had seen in earlier days, but clearly there is not a lot of confidence leading sellers to buy a lot or to sell a lot right now either. But what everyone does seem to be paying attention to, no matter whether it's the New York Stock Exchanges or the Toronto ones, is global trade, and specifically those tariffs between the United States and China. When we looked at Asian markets earlier today, many of them had taken a drop. U.S. Treasuries and bonds, also something that we have been talking about earlier in the week, typically a sign of international confidence in the American economy as a whole. They're creeping back up, which usually is not a great sign, but we're not seeing anything like the whiplash that we had seen earlier in the week. But overall, markets are, teeter-tottering slightly. It's so hard to describe. Every time I look at the boards, they've changed slightly. When we looked at that New York Stock Exchange one there, red as the morning went, then green, then red again. I need many pencil crayons today, Natasha.
Well, there it is. Well, I mean, you just need the two, but they're worn thin because of the nature of the week. Let's talk about China a bit more, because we did mention that they're raising tariffs again on U.S. products to 125%. You know how you just said the markets are... Yeah, I sort of feel that way about this tariff battle between Beijing and Washington. $100 billion tariffs, billion tariffs. What are we watching for, and how does this end?
I mean, we are talking about a trade war between the two biggest economies in the world. And when China announced its, what I would normally have said, jaw-dropping 125% tariffs on the United States, and I only say it's maybe not so jaw-dropping now because that's in response to 145% from the United States, we saw drops in Asian markets. They're mostly closed now, but when Japan opened earlier today in their time zone, big dive. South Korea took a dive. Shanghai closed pretty flat, but there were some losses there. So it does seem like, at least as far as investors in Asia go, there's not a lot of optimism around what's happening between China and the United States. One thing to note is that the U.S. dollar has taken a dive against many currencies, the yen, the euro, the Canadian dollar. So on the one hand, when you're looking at something like the Canadian dollar, you might be like, oh, that went up. But actually, it means that the U.S. dollar is going down. So investors around the globe are saying they are not keen on what's happening between the U.S. and China. And it seems like whether you are in Asia or North America right now, if you have money and you're trying to invest it, you maybe don't think you're going to make so much money in the future. But as for what comes next, it really depends on what the politicians do, Natasha.
Oh, boy. Okay, we'll be watching for that as well. CBC's business reporter, Anis Hadari in Calgary. Thank you so much, Anis.
You're welcome.
If you are traveling to the U.S. and planning an extended stay, take note of a new rule which is now in effect. It's a change that comes from the American crackdown on border security. It's been in the works since President Donald Trump signed an executive order on his first day in the White House. And earlier this month, the federal government updated its travel advice to remind Canadian travelers to expect, quote, closer scrutiny from the U.S. border officers. CBC's Linda Ward is here in studio now. She's been looking into the details of this. So what are these new rules? What do Canadian travelers need to know?
Yeah, so they're new rules, but they're actually really old rules. This actually goes back to 1940. The Alien Registration Act is what it was called back then. But then this executive order sort of kicked it into high gear. The executive order protecting the American public against invasion, requiring the Department of Homeland Security to now go ahead and enforce this. And this new rule means that Canadian citizens and permanent residents who are going to be in the United States for 30 days or more now have to be registered if they're 14 years of age or older. They have to register with the U.S. government, and they have to have one of these. This is a Form I-94. It is an arrival departure record that you will get if you register with the government. There it is. If you enter by air, most likely you were automatically registered for one of these. If you have a work visa, student visa, also you're probably covered there as well. If you enter by land border, most likely you are not. And they won't be given any proof when you enter the country as to whether or not you have one. So you have to go online and you have to check with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's website. If it's not there, you have to register online right away. The fingerprint requirement that's in place for a number of countries, that is not in place for Canadians. We are exempt from that. But the penalties for failing to register for this, up to $5,000 in fine, up to 6 months in jail, possibly even both. A lot of Canadians are affected by this, of course, and we think about snowbirds who spend a lot of time down south throughout the winter. This snowbird just returned home from her winter in Florida, and she's rethinking some plans going forward.
I'm contemplating going next year. I'm undecided. I understand that if you fly, the registration is automatic, although you do need to download the paperwork and have it with you at all times, apparently, for what? I don't know who's going to stop me. I have no idea.
Right.
So I think if I go next year, I don't think I'm going to drive. I think I've made the decision that I will probably fly to avoid just the whole mess, crossing the border, possibly being detained.
And that woman isn't alone, Linda. We've heard from so many people in our own friends and family networks that are saying, maybe not right now, not to the U.S. Let's find another destination. But as I mentioned off the top, the Canadian government has also issued a new travel advisory for Canadians. What are they saying?
Yeah, so that is also sort of piling onto that anxiety as well, because this warning, even though the risk level remains the same and sort of, you go about your usual travels in the United States, it is warning of increased scrutiny. And here's what Global Affairs Canada says. U.S. authorities strictly enforce entry requirements, expect scrutiny at ports of entry, including of electronic devices, comply and be forthcoming in all interactions with border authorities. Now, this warning is not exclusive to just Canada. It's also, we're seeing warnings like this in Germany, in the UK, they've issued similar warnings. Of course, the U.S. Border Patrol has always had the power to search all of your personal devices. They don't need a warrant for that as long as you're at the border. Once you enter the country, they do. But this current climate that we're in, the state of Canada-U.S. relations, has people thinking that there is going to be more scrutiny. They're going to be looking a little bit more closely. This travel agent who works with the Iranian community here says she's seen a total halt in trips to the United States.
In some cases, they have been asked to show their social media account. They feel unwelcome. They feel that being singled out just because the place of birth or because their name, not because what they have done. There is no clear reason that why someone has to be going through this screening.
And she's not just being overcautious. We have been hearing stories and reporting stories of foreign nationals, including at least one Canadian who was detained, others who've been denied entry to the United States despite having all the proper documentation in place.
It's a very different world right now. Thanks so much, Linda.
You're welcome.
Well, with the federal election about 2.5 weeks away, one of the key demographics, as usual, will be young Canadians. How could their voting habits play a role in this election? That story is coming up right here on CBC News Network. How young people vote could be central to how this election campaign unfolds. And that is the topic of discussion in university towns all across this country, like Kingston, Ontario. That's where we find CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick. She's traveling across Ontario for us during this campaign, talking to people about the election issues that matter to them. So Megan, you've been speaking to university students there. Are they paying attention to this campaign?
Some are, some aren't, is what I'm hearing, Natasha. Yeah, there's a large student population here in the city of Kingston because of Queen's University, where we are right now, but also St. Lawrence College is here, the Royal Military College is here as well. So we've been talking to students about whether they're paying attention, and if they are, what issues are important to them, and if they feel like the campaigns have been reaching them. Some of them telling me, Natasha, that yes, they've been seeing ads on their social media platforms, for example, from the campaigns. They are being reached that way. But, you know, in terms of timing of this election, right now, students here at Queen's University and campuses across the country, they're in exams right now. There's some happening in this building right as I speak. And so some of the students are a little distracted. They haven't turned their attention yet to the campaign. Some are telling me they do plan to, but so far it's not on their radar. But some of the students I met with yesterday, some of them are political science students, so they are very much engaged in the campaign and have been paying close attention. And I asked them what their top priorities are and what they want to hear from the political leaders. Here's some of what they told me.
I think I'm most concerned with the climate crisis and combating it. I was a little bit nervous to see Carney cut the carbon tax because I don't know what policies on the environment he has in store, or if he has any idea on how he wants to attack this issue.
I think as a student in Kingston, the rental prices are like so high, so like the lack of housing affordability is like a big issue for me especially.
I know one of them is definitely cost of living. It's gotten to the point where I know for myself and for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, we're heavily considering whether we can even stay in Canada, because at this point it's just impossible to do things like buy a house.
That last student there is a graduating student, and a couple others are finishing their time here at Queen's, Natasha. And I was hearing from them sort of a sense of uncertainty as they head out into the world and look for a job. And given what's happening right now in the world, in Canada, relations with the U.S., you know, a little bit of extra anxiety for some of these graduating students. But yeah, those ones definitely engaged. Some of them are even volunteering on some campaigns, volunteering with Elections Canada as well. One student I met on the street yesterday yesterday saying when Pierre Poilievre came to town a few days ago, he went to the rally just out of curiosity. He said if Mark Carney came to town, he would also go to that one to check it out as well. This is a long-held Liberal riding, but Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative campaign did make an appearance here a couple days ago.
So what are you hearing in terms of people actually turning out to vote?
Yeah, I mean, we know traditionally the age group of 18 to 24-year-olds, voter turnout not always that high. In 2021, it was about 46%. And Elections Canada, they do surveys to find out why people aren't voting. And when they have asked young people who are students why they haven't voted, being away for school is often cited as one of the reasons. So this year, though, there will be on-campus voting for students here at Queen's and other campuses across the country as well. So the hope is that that will make it a little easier. Sometimes there's confusion for students. They don't know exactly where to vote, how to vote, if they are away for school, which riding do they cast a ballot in. One thing I've been hearing, Natasha, though, that I found quite interesting from the students I was talking to is they are predicting turnout might be a little higher this time. And one of the reasons is because of Donald Trump and the relations between Canada and the U.S. right now and the tariff war and the trade war. Take a listen to what I heard about that.
For us, it's been quite busy. I haven't had too many political discussions, but I think because we are seeing such a difference in the atmosphere, the political sphere currently, I think we are going to see a lot of increased youth voting this election.
Well, there's definitely been a change in rhetoric due to Donald Trump and all of his new tariffs, which is very interesting, and it's actually gotten a lot of attention from students and especially younger people, which is a demographic that we don't always find votes. Even though there are more younger people, they're less likely to vote, but because of this, it's evoked a lot of new emotion.
So we'll see if those emotions translate into votes and a higher turnout this time. Natasha, some of those students I was talking to, it'll be their first time voting in a federal election, and they told me they're very excited to cast their ballots.
Okay, thanks so much, Megan. are looking live at Ottawa. The Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations is meeting right now to discuss U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. We're going to be watching to see what comes out of that meeting, and we will bring you all the very latest as soon as it gets underway. We are anticipating to hear from some of the members of that committee. They'll come out later on in the day to speak, and we'll bring you their comments live as soon as they get underway. You are watching CBC News Network. Hello and welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. I'm Natasha Fateh. The escalating global trade war is the main topic of discussion around kitchen tables, corporate boardrooms, factories, and small businesses right across this country. It's also dominating discussions again in Ottawa. Mark Carney is off the campaign trail for a third time, and at this very hour, he is meeting with his Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. relations. Now, Canada faces serious headwinds as one of the only countries, along with China, mounting a major response to Donald Trump's tariff onslaught. Committee members had little to say on their way into that meeting. We'll bring you any comments as soon as they emerge. And in the meantime, we also got an update from the Conservatives as Pierre Poilievre made a campaign announcement at a shipyard in St. Catharines, Ontario. For more on all of this, we're joined by CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian, who's in our parliamentary bureau. So Rafi, let's start with that Conservative event. We carried it live here on CBC News Network. What did we hear from the leader?
Natasha, it was largely more of a campaign re-announcement. Pierre Poilievre, he focused on the economic offerings he's made during the first couple of weeks of this election, whether that's that 15% proposed income tax cut or the cancellation of the industrial carbon tax, or how he would get 350,000 construction workers to work. He sort of repackaged all of these as the economic action plan. And if those words seem like a little bit of deja vu to viewers who followed politics for a long time, it's because that's deliberate. In 2008, that's what former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper called his suite of economic measures to get Canada out of the recession. Poilievre was deliberately echoing that because he wants to remind his audience that Stephen Harper, a Conservative, was in charge when Canada had to face a recession, and also wanted to point out how successfully Canada got out of it. Now, 2008 is a year Mark Carney, the Liberal leader, has been nodding at a lot because he used to be the central bank governor of Canada at the time, of the Bank of Canada, rather, and he has positioned himself as a capable economic steward at the time that Canada is dealing with Donald Trump. Speaking of echoes from 2008, Poilievre fielded a question from our CBC colleague Marina von Stackelberg about criticism he has faced from Stephen Harper's former Director of Communications, Corey Tanaik, who is well known in Ontario Conservative circles nowadays as a successful campaign manager for Premier Doug Ford during his elections. Tanaik said that it is campaign malpractice for someone to blow a 25-point lead in the polls, as Poilievre has over the last few weeks. Poilievre was asked what he thinks of that. Here was his response.
Liberals and lobbyists want to focus, want me to stop talking about high food prices. Well, I'm not going to do that, because single mothers shouldn't be going to bed hungry, worried about how they're going to feed their kids in the morning. They want me to stop talking about the doubling housing costs during the lost Liberal decade. I'm not going to stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about the rampaging crime that's overtaking our streets and the overdose crisis Liberals caused that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. I will not stop talking about that either.
As you said, he was in St. Catharines, Ontario for that announcement, and he also faced a question about one of his local candidates in St. Catharines, someone who has public pro-life views, who has even compared abortion to genocide. And Poilievre was asked, would you allow a free vote on this if, say, that member proposed a private member's bill in the House of Commons? And he reminded people that for the last 21 years, the Conservatives have had a policy of not trying to put into place any laws restricting abortion. However, he did not answer the part of the question which was about allowing free votes.
Rafi, let's turn our attention now to Mark Carney, Liberal leader, who is now today wearing his prime ministerial hat. He's in that cabinet committee meeting dealing once again with the trade war, which is dominating the headlines. Are we learning anything more about that meeting?
Yes, we're starting to learn what they're talking about around that table. We know that they're discussing China's retaliation against the U.S. and the U.S. counter-retaliation to that. There's starting to be many levels of retaliation here. They're talking about issues at the Quebec border, and they're talking about the volatility of the markets. Now, this is the third time Mark Carney has interrupted his campaign to put that Prime Minister hat on. You might recall during the first week, it was to respond to those surprise tariffs announced by the U.S. During week 2, it was to respond to the auto tariffs, which the U.S. had long telegraphed would be coming on April 2nd. There doesn't seem to be a Canada-specific reason this week. We know that Canada was not hit with anything new. We know that Canada was not part of the pause on higher rates of tariffs that Trump announced this week, because that higher rate was supposed to apply to countries already being hit with that baseline 10%, and Canada is not part of those. Nevertheless, Carney has continuously brought up Trump during this campaign. He did that again at a rally in Hamilton last night.
I'm back on Trump, I'm afraid. He won't go away. He will not go away. And that steadily deepening integration with the United States, that is also over. And, you know, this is a tragedy. We didn't ask for this. It's a tragedy, but it's a new reality. And the question is, how do we respond as a nation? We're responding with purpose and with force.
We haven't heard any guarantees that Carney will come out of that meeting and speak to the media today. So if he did not do that, that would mean that there would effectively be no media availability from one of the frontrunners or the frontrunner in this election campaign on today. We also haven't heard anything yet from his cabinet ministers. We did see several of them walk into there and not stop to speak to reporters. You saw Stephen McKinnon at the beginning of this program. We also know that Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister, Bill Blair, the Defense Minister, Anita Anand, the Industry Minister, are all in there right now.
CBC's Rafi Boujakanyan in Ottawa. Thank you. The federal leader debates are next week, and CBC News will bring you live coverage from Montreal. The French debate will take place on Wednesday, April the 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be broadcast live with simultaneous interpretation on CBC News Network, as well as on the CBC News app, on GEM, YouTube, and on our website. Now, the English language debate is on Thursday, April the 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can watch that, of course, on CBC TV, CBC News Network, and everywhere you stream CBC News. Well, uncertainty continues to rattle global stock markets due to Donald Trump's wide-ranging trade war. Much of the focus now is on the escalating tariff war between the world's two largest economies, which has no end in sight. Just today, China increased its tariffs on U.S. goods to 125%, and that is in response to Donald Trump's new tariffs that were announced yesterday that boosted duties on Chinese goods to 145%. This back and forth in Trump's overall trade war has caused big swings on stock markets all week. To bring us up to speed on what is happening on the markets right now, we're joined once again by CBC's business reporter Anis Hadari. Anis, we just spoke a little while ago. How's it looking now, friend?
It's very much the same. We're seeing sort of whipsaw on the markets as they open. There's a little bit of green here, mostly red, but even then the reds are not the steep drops that we've seen over the past few days. If we look at the Dow Jones Industrial Index, you can see the up and down there. Starts out a little bit red, goes a little bit green, then goes back to red, smidge of green, back to red again. But we're only talking about drops of a few hundred points here, less than a whole percentage point up or down in either direction. So really, that market is remaining, I would say, relatively flat. Similar story on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Here in Canada, we're seeing that it's a little bit up right now, but while those point values, 151 points, 147 points, that might sound like a lot. We're really only talking about, half of a percentage point, not even an entire percentage point either up or down. So really the markets and the people who run the markets, right? The investors who are choosing where to put their money, the institutions that are run by people who are choosing where to put their money, they don't seem to be panicked about anything right now, but they don't seem super positive about anything either. Really, Wall Street and Bay Street alike are paying attention to global trade at this point. They are looking at the tariffs that were announced by China, I suppose late last night for us, but on Friday morning in that time zone of 125%. That's in response to the United States saying 145% tariffs against China. Really, this is all about a global trade war in both of those countries, even though we're looking at markets everywhere else. But right now, everyone seems to be in I don't know if I want to call it cat-like readiness, but just there's trades happening and everyone's kind of a little bit up, a little bit down, mostly on pause.
Anis, you mentioned the back and forth between China and the United States. I mean, these are very, very high levels of tariff with the world's two biggest economies, and all of us are sort of caught in between of the how this trade war is moving forward. So today, right now, what are you watching for?
So Asian markets have mostly closed due to the time zones, but what we saw today was drops in quite a few of them. Japan took a big dive when it opened today, South Korea as well. Shanghai took some drops, but then closed pretty flat. But what that can tell us is that investors who are moving on Asian markets don't have a lot of optimism about what's to come. And certainly there isn't a lot of optimism, not just in Asia, but in the United States as well, or towards the United States, because we are seeing the US dollar take some drops. And so Canadians who maybe don't think that these markets mean that much to them might look at the Canadian dollar though and go like, hey, well, that's gone up. That's actually a sign of what's happening between Asia and North America, between China and the United States, because the Canadian dollar going up is about the US dollar going down. And that can tell us that international investors no longer feel a lot of optimism about the American economy. And they probably don't feel that optimism because the other giant economy in the world, China, is in a big fight with the United States and vice versa, Natasha.
Okay, CBC's business reporter Anis Hedari in Calgary. Thank you, Anis.
You're welcome.
And as Anis was mentioning, the escalating trade fight between the United States and China made for a mixed Friday on the Asian markets. Hong Kong and Shanghai both closed with this wild week on the upside, but Japan's Nikkei was down 3%. Now it comes after the announcement by China once again of those 125% tariffs on U.S. goods. China's president is also now speaking out, saying nations like his won't be bullied. Journalist Patrick Falk reports from Singapore.
Chinese leader Xi Jinping notably spoke out for the first time about the tariff fight, even as President Trump has goaded China and as both nations have traded insults with one another. He has stayed silent up until now. In a meeting with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, he said that China's development had come about as a result of self-reliance, hard work, and he also added that China would never fear what he described as unjustified suppression. Now, the timing of the announcement about the latest countermeasures was interesting because it came just as markets in this region were closing. Shanghai and Hong Kong notably ended the session higher after reversing earlier losses. Investors are betting that the Chinese government will unleash stimulus to help shore up the economy in the coming days. The new tariffs that are going to be placed on American goods exported to China will take effect on April 12th. In making the announcement, the Tariff Commission also said that it would ignore any future tariff hikes by the Trump administration because it had become a joke. Echoing those sentiments, the Commerce Ministry also said that it had become economically meaningless and added that it had simply become a numbers game at this point. Patrick Falk for CBC News, Singapore.
Now, if you're planning on making a trip to the United States, be advised. Foreign nationals, including Canadians, who plan to stay for 30 days or more will now have to comply with a new set of rules that involve registering. This is all coming from an executive order issued by the U.S. president. For details on this, let's turn to CBC's Mark Carney, who's in studio now. So, a lot of restrictions, some of them are actually quite old, these rules that are in place, but just clarify for us, what is changing?
Yeah, that executive order that you mentioned that the Donald Trump administration implemented is actually sort of the resurrection, if you will, of an old rule that's decades old at this point. If you have friends or family or you yourself travel regularly for long periods of time to the U.S., you will know that up until today anyway, you could really go there for up to 6 months without a visa and stay as long as you declared how long you planned on staying. Well, that's all out of the water now. The new rules installed as of today dictate that if you're going to stay there for 30 days or more, you have to register with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It used to be that you could use one of these forms, an I-94 form, upon entering the U.S., and they're still issuing those. If you got one of those, then you typically should be allowed to stay for now. But now you'll have to use a form called a G325R form to stay a month or longer. This is an example of the old I-94 form. Shout out to Ahmed Sample of Pakistan there. I don't think that was a real form.
I know
or a real
that
person,
guy, sorry.
but that's what it used to look like. Now, there was talk that fingerprints might be required for Canadians to go over into the U.S. for 30 days or more. That is not the case. People from other nations who plan to go to the U.S. for more than a month will be fingerprinted, but Canadians are exempted from that. We don't really necessarily know why, but there's this historic relationship, obviously, between us and the U.S. many years of trust, and that might be part of the reason why. But it's one of the things that has many people, like Janie Patterson, who's a regular Canadian snowbird, goes to Florida and Arizona every winter. That's what's got her so upset, is she still is considering going. She's got a lot of friends over there in the U.S., but she just feels like this is a breakdown in a long-term relationship.
I think just the whole thing, just the whole aura of this change in relationship and the requirements. The question I think most Canadians are asking is, what's next? Because, you know, the people in power in the United States are constantly changing the rules. The game is changing. What's next? What will I have to do? And if you're down there, you're more vulnerable to the changes.
An effort on behalf of a group called the American Immigration Council, which filed a lawsuit in D.C. that tried to either motion for a temporary injunction or a stay of these rules. That was unsuccessful. The judge decided not to go ahead with that. So these rules are now in effect as of today. And Canada has issued a travel advisory to Canadian citizens about going to the U.S. U.S. authorities strictly enforce entry requirements, expect scrutiny at ports of entry, including of electronic devices. We have heard reports of border guards looking through people's phones, their social media. Comply and be forthcoming in all interactions with border authorities is the advice from the Government of Canada. Here's the second part, though. If you are denied entry, you could be detained while awaiting deportation. So something for people certainly to look out for if you plan to go to the U.S. for 30 days or more.
Okay, good to know. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
With the federal election about 2.5 weeks away, one of the key demographics is young Canadians. We're going to hear from some university students about what they're considering before casting their ballot. That's coming up on CBC News Network. The main focus of the federal election campaign appears to be the ongoing trade war with the United States. But the leaders of some of Canada's communities hardest hit by climate change feel that issue has been ignored. Well, dozens of mayors and councillors right across the country have signed an open letter released just this morning. And in it, they ask federal leaders to take action on climate change and on the economy. CBC's Brett Ruskin has the details.
This letter looks at what it calls bold but achievable goals for federal politicians should they get elected during this campaign. It looks at things like a national east-west-north clean energy grid, a national high-speed rail network, increasing the amount of housing available by creating 2 million new energy-efficient and affordable homes, creating a retrofit program to improve and increase the energy efficiency of existing homes, making them easier to cool in the the summer, easier to heat in the winter, as well as a climate resiliency and response program and fund to help during the next climate emergency. Canada certainly has seen its share of climate emergencies over the last couple of years, whether it's hurricanes that hit here on the east coast, wildfires farther out on the west coast, and likewise this open letter has signatories all across the country as well. Mayors and councillors who say that the main topic of discussion during this campaign has understandably been the relationship between Canada and the United States, but that there should be room made for additional topics of discussion that center around climate change. Here is the mayor of Jasper, Alberta, one of the signatories to this letter.
This is a perfect opportunity to focus on that other existential threat to communities, to our economy, and to our very lives, which is the threat from climate change. We have taken advantage of this opportunity to draw those matters to the attention of political leaders and to Canadians, that we still have another issue to deal with.
Again, this letter hopes that federal politicians address what it calls the urgent need to act on climate change. It has been a topic of discussion of previous campaigns, previous years, talking about kind of the national discussion around climate change. The signatories to this open letter hope that it once again emerges as one of the main topics of discussion during this ongoing campaign. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
And the federal election campaign is also reigniting the conversation around the voting age. Vote 16 Canada is a nonpartisan campaign led by young advocates right across the country, and they're hoping to lower the age of voting from 18 to 16. Julia Balai-Greentham is leading the movement in Yukon.
Really think about all the horrible stuff happening in the world, and you're like, oh Lord, what are we gonna do about this? This is kind of a scary world to be the next leaders of. But realizing that everyone's been a youth at some point, everyone has had that hope at some point. If you vote your first election, you're most likely to be a lifelong voter.
Meanwhile, in university towns, many young voters are considering the issues that matter most to them before casting a ballot. CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is in Kingston, Ontario, speaking to Queen's University students about the campaign.
Some of them telling me, Natasha, that yes, they've been seeing ads on their social media platforms, for example, from the campaigns. They are being reached that way. But, in terms of timing of this election, right now, students here at Queen's University and campuses across the country, they're in exams right now. There's some happening in this building right as I speak. And so some of the students are a little distracted. They haven't turned their attention yet to the campaign. Some are telling me they do plan to, but so far it's not on their radar. But some of the students I met with yesterday, some of them are political science students, so they are very much engaged in the campaign and have been paying close attention. And I asked them what their top priorities are and what they want to hear from the political leaders. Here's some of what they told me.
I think I'm most concerned with the climate crisis and combating it. I was a little bit nervous to see Carney cut the carbon tax, because I don't know what policies on the environment he has in store, or if he has any idea on how he wants to attack this issue.
I think as a student in Kingston, the rental prices are so high, so the lack of housing affordability is a big issue for me, especially.
I know one of them is definitely cost of living. It's gotten to the point where I know for myself and for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, we're heavily considering whether we can even stay in Canada, because at this point it's just impossible to do things like buy a house.
That last student there is a graduating student, and a couple others are finishing their time here at Queen's, Natasha, and I was hearing from them sort of a sense of uncertainty as they head out into the world and look for a job. And given what's happening right now in the world, in Canada, relations with the U.S., a little bit of extra anxiety for some of these graduating students. But yeah, those ones definitely engaged. Some of them are even volunteering on some campaigns, volunteering with Elections Canada as well. One student I met on the street yesterday saying when Pierre Poilievre came to town a few days ago, he went to the rally just out of curiosity. He said if Mark Carney came to town, he would also go to that one to check it out as well. This is a long-held Liberal riding, but Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative campaign did make an appearance here a couple days ago.
So what are you hearing in terms of people actually turning out to vote?
Yeah, we know traditionally the age group of 18 to 24-year-olds Voter turnout, not always that high. In 2021, it was about 46%. And Elections Canada, they do surveys to find out why people aren't voting. And when they have asked young people who are students why they haven't voted, being away for school is often cited as one of the reasons. So this year, though, there will be on-campus voting for students here at Queen's and other campuses across the country as well. So the hope is that that will make it a little easier. Sometimes there's confusion for students. They don't know exactly where to vote, how to vote, if they are away for school, which riding do they cast a ballot in. One thing I've been hearing, Natasha, though, that I found quite interesting from the students I was talking to is they are predicting turnout might be a little higher this time. And one of the reasons is because of Donald Trump and the relations between Canada and the U.S. right now, and the tariff war and the trade war. Take a listen to what I heard about that.
For us, it's been quite busy. I haven't had too many political discussions, but I think because we are seeing such a difference in the atmosphere, the political sphere currently, I think we are going to see a lot of increased youth voting this election.
Well, there's definitely been a change in rhetoric due to Donald Trump and all of his new tariffs, which is very interesting, and it's actually gotten a lot of attention from students and especially younger people, which is a demographic that we don't always find votes. Even though there are more younger people, they're less likely to vote, but because of this, it's evoked a lot of new emotion.
So we'll see if those emotions translate into votes and a higher turnout this time. Natasha, some of those students I was talking to, it'll be their first time voting in a federal election, and they told me they're very excited to cast their ballots.
CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Kingston, Ontario. And coming up next, we're going to be answering your election questions with our CBC News Fact Check team. That's coming up right here on CBC News Network. federal election campaign has now passed the halfway mark, and CBC News is answering your questions on the road to Election Day on April the 28th. Jonathan Gatehouse is part of the CBC News fact-check team, and he joins me in studio now. Jonathan, good to have you back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the first question that comes from Carmelo. And Carmelo's actually asking about the bloc. He's asking, can they win a federal election and can their party leader become prime minister, or are they just a party that concentrates in the province of Quebec? How does it play out for the rest of the provinces?
So this one, the Bloc Québécois, as the name suggests, is all about Quebec and the interests of Quebecers. In this election, as in all past ones since they were founded in 1991, they're only presenting candidates in Quebec contesting all 78 ridings. Now, if you do the math, which is always a little troublesome for journalists, there are 343 ridings in Canada. There are 5 major parties, so it is theoretically possible that the Bloc Québécois could win the most seats, and Yves-François Blanchet would be offered the opportunity to become prime minister. But even though they always present a campaign platform during elections, they have always maintained that they don't want to be part of a government or to govern. And as such, this is their raison d'etre, is to promote the interests of Quebec and Quebecers in Ottawa. But after 35 years, I think it is fair to say that they are very much a fixture in parliamentary life.
Okay, good to know. So the next question comes from Neil, who's from Carleton riding, and says, how is it possible to put forth so many nominations in one riding? Would this be an attempt to confuse the voters?
So this is a reference to the Carleton riding in southern Ottawa, which is Pierre Poilievre's riding. And right now, on the ballot, there will be 91 names, which ties a Canadian record that was set during a federal by-election in Montreal this past September. Now, a lot of these candidates registered at the very last minute, and almost all of them, 85 of them, are independents, and they share the same official agent, a gentleman named Thomas Zuchowicz, and he's affiliated with an organization called the Longest Ballot Committee, which is got a relationship with the satirical Rhinoceros Party. And so, in terms of how this happens, it's actually pretty easy to get on the ballot in Canada. All you need is the names, signatures, and addresses of 100 qualified voters in a riding. The why, well, here it is a form of protest. It's supposed to be a fun protest, this organization says, to draw attention to inefficiencies in the system. And is it going to sow confusion? I think this is probably unlikely. I mean, Pierre Poilievre has pretty good name recognition. He's been the MP in this riding or in this area since 2004. But Elections Canada is warning that this could delay the count on election night.
Okay. And finally, we have a couple of questions from Doris, and nice and easy ones. This shouldn't be a problem at all. Doris wants to know who is responsible for collecting the tariffs that are owed to Canada, how are they accounted for, and where does the tariff money go? Example, the Bank of Canada, or before our government uses it.
Okay, so tariffs, like the retaliatory ones that have been put in place against the United States, are collected by the Canada Border Service Agency when goods cross into Canada. And like all payments, they are made or remitted to the Receiver General of Canada. Now, the Receiver General functions as Ottawa's accountant and custodian of what is called the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And what that really means is that they they maintain the bank accounts for the government. And every year they prepare the Public Accounts of Canada, which includes the audited financial annual statements of the government. So in terms of the money, the government has pledged that every dollar that's collected from these retaliatory tariffs is going to go to help workers and affected businesses. So if we use the example of the 25% tariff on autos, that means that a part of that money is supposed to be earmarked for changes to enhance employment insurance, and the remainder is supposed to help defer corporate income tax and GST payments.
Okay, really helpful information. Jonathan Gatehouse, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And let's stay on the campaign trail. We've all seen the crowds at those political rallies. For the Liberals, yes, but more particularly for the Conservatives, who really emphasized the turnout at their events, and maybe overemphasized, as some new CBC News analysis suggests. We've delved into that topic earlier with our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton.
A couple things with those rallies. They seem to be of a great importance to Mr. Poilievre. He brings them up more often than reporters, points to them as a sign of growing success and momentum inside the party. They are certainly an indication of his popularity within the Conservative Party and the excitement that he generates. Whether they are a sign of something broader in terms of broad Canadian support, I think is really up for debate and discussion, given the kinds of movement that we're seeing in the polls. This comes, at a time when Mr. Poilievre is also facing criticism about how he's handling the media and how many questions and lack of follow-up questions he's taking from the media. Again, that is an attempt, of course, to remove risk and try and make sure that there are not hard-hitting questions that foul up Mr. Poilievre, although his camp also says that this is also about making sure that reporters who are not part of the press gallery, not part of the Ottawa bubble, local reporters and other quote-unquote non-mainstream media also get an opportunity to ask him questions. So I think both of those things can be true, but he's been criticized for that this week. And this focus on rallies at the same time as there are people, or at least a group of people, who showed up at a rally wearing sweatshirts saying, "Don't believe the polls," sort of, raises some questions about what's going on in terms of the campaign's perception of success. It also can, I think, derail some of the important policy issues that Mr. Poilievre is putting forward, whether it be on crime or, again, today talking more about measures for the economy. Getting bogged down in that kind of stuff, probably not great for the third week of a campaign.
That's CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton. And as we have mentioned, a CBC News investigation has taken place into the rally sizes. And in fact, our visual investigations team has hand-counted the people in the images from both Liberal and Conservative rallies. We also got expert analysis from crowd scientists. And we found the actual number of attendees is likely a lot lower than what the campaigns are claiming. You can check out that analysis on our website or on the CBC News app. And a reminder that CBC News Network is now free to watch for the remainder of the federal election campaign. You can tune into Canada's #1 news network through your cable provider on CBC Gem, CBCNews.ca, and on the CBC News app. Stay with Canada's breaking news throughout the latest on this federal election campaign. A preliminary hearing for Canadian businessman Frank Stronach's sex crimes trial is underway today in Toronto. Stronach is facing more than a dozen charges being made by 13 different women. CBC's Lisa Shing is outside the courthouse with more.
In the preliminary hearing, we're expected to hear evidence related to the case and likely from the complainants themselves. Here in Toronto alone, Frank Stronach is facing 11 sex crime charges brought forward by 7 different complainants, and they range from rape to sexual assault to forcible confinement. These incidents allegedly happened between 1977 and 1990, so they date back decades. And over the course of the hearing, the evidence that is presented is expected to go towards the judge deciding whether or not there's enough of it to proceed to trial. I spoke with a criminal defense lawyer in Toronto, Trevin David, who is not related to the proceedings, about what we can expect during the hearing.
Whatever is heard at this trial, whoever testifies, what questions are asked and what their answers are, that's not revealed until after the case is finished, just to make sure that when this does go to trial, they don't have to worry about jury members being possibly polluted or hearing some of the stuff that may or may not even make its way to trial.
Now, Frank Stronach is 92 years old. He is a billionaire. He has received the Order of Canada, and he founded auto parts giant Magna International back in the 1950s. And at one point, he was probably one of the country's most influential businessmen. And a lot of these incidents allegedly happened during his time as CEO. So last year, CBC's The Fifth Estate spoke with one of the accusers of Frank Stronach, and she says it took her 35 years to come forward to police, and even after she did, it took another decade for charges to be brought forward after new allegations surfaced. So in light of the fact that these alleged incidents date back so long, there are some unique challenges associated with it. This is what Trevin David, the criminal defense lawyer, had to say.
The one biggest issue, I think, for all sides will be understanding how we deal with memory and the frailties of memory when we're talking about things that happened in the 70s or the 80s. I think we all can appreciate how difficult it might be to remember something that happened a month ago or a year ago.
There is also a separate case going on in a Newmarket, Ontario courtroom. There, Frank Stronach faces 6 sex crime charges brought forward by 6 other complainants, and that case will head back to court next year in March. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Planned job cuts by the U.S. Health and Human Services Department is threatening to put thousands of healthcare employees out of work south of the border. Now, Canadian agencies are seeing this as an opportunity to fill a shortage of doctors and other healthcare workers in this country. CBC's Georgie Smythe explains.
Crowds of laid-off healthcare workers line up outside federal buildings as promised cuts to jobs and spending take effect.
As part of President Trump's DOGE workforce reduction initiative, we're going to streamline HHS.
But those losses could be Canada's gain, with agencies here seeing a surge of inquiries from doctors thinking of relocating north.
There's no question the U.S. physicians are interested in coming to Canada.
But Canadian authorities need to turn that interest into offers, she says.
And so if you can demonstrate that you're a province where there's less paperwork, where people can seek out research if they're interested, where they will be supported to do the work that they really feel passionate about, that weighs a lot when someone's thinking about where they want to work.
Currently, only BC, Ontario, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia have fast-track pathways for US physicians to migrate and work in Canada without needing additional exams or supervision.
So I just Googled jobs in Toronto, which is where I'm from, and they had job offers and said that Americans were invited. I was, whoa.
Dr. Karen Ginsberg is transferring her American qualifications to work in Ontario starting next year.
The sentiment as a physician here in the United States right now is really, it's been quite depressing. It's not the medicine itself. It's the way our country is going right now and the way medicine has gone, and it's a mess. It's a big mess.
But recruiters warn it'll take some time to settle people.
By the time they get licensed, interview process, I mean, you're talking at least a month to maybe 2 months, and then they have to give notice where they are. So we usually say, you're looking at 3 to 6 months.
For years, Canada has turned to other countries to recruit healthcare workers. Now expect provinces to get louder and more targeted to speak directly to Americans. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Okay, friends, I just want to let you know that we are standing by. As we've mentioned earlier in the show, we're expecting to hear from Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister Mark Carney any moment now in Ottawa. It seems as though the meeting with his Cabinet Committee on U.S.-Canada Relations and National Security has met. We've seen many of the ministers in the shot I have to my side coming out through the doorways and whisking past reporters and photographers who are there. We are hoping that Mark Carney will stop, will make some comments, will answer questions. So I'll keep an eye on this, but I'll ask the control room, should we keep going or do you want to go to the shot? Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that. I promise we'll go there as soon as it gets underway. But you'll recall that earlier in the show, we told you about this election and how young Canadians are reigniting the debate on voting age. A national organization and its Yukon chapter say that age should be dropped from 18 to 16. Virginie Ann has more from Whitehorse.
Each election brings its share of questions about voting age. Should teenagers be allowed to vote? 16-year-olds can drive, they can consent to having sex, they can pay their taxes, they can even legally emancipate from their parents. So why not let them vote and have a say in their future? That's exactly what Yukon youth leader of Vote 16 Canada is thinking.
Really think about all the horrible stuff happening in the world, and you're like, oh Lord, what are we gonna do about this? This is kind of a scary world to be the next leaders of, but realizing that everyone's been a youth at some point, everyone has had that hope at some point. If you vote your first election, you're most likely to be a lifelong voter, and we know in this country we need higher voter participation.
There's been a significant turnout gap between younger and older voters in Canada over the last years. Vote 16 Canada says lowering voting age could help. But this Whitehorse resident isn't sure letting teens near the ballot box is a good idea.
I would be worried of how easily young people who don't really care about politics their vote could be swayed, or their vote could be not bought literally, but kind of bought in a metaphorical sense by someone just telling them something that they don't really know much about.
That concern is actually a double standard, according to the executive director for the David Asper Center for Constitutional Rights. Cheryl Milne says teenagers are not blind to politics. They do have some form of political education.
We don't expect adults to have a certain level of education before they can vote. We don't even expect them to have a certain level of competence before they can vote. So it would be a standard that is applied to young people that's not applied to adults.
Mills says that those who would want to be able to vote at a young age are also those who educate themselves about politics. She adds that engagement needs to happen on both sides, but right now in this election, with the focus on Trump, tariffs, national defense, there's no focus on young people's issues. Virginie Anne, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Once again, here is a look live at what's going on in Cabinet, in and around Cabinet, because the Cabinet Committee on Canada-U.S. Relations has just finished their meeting, and they were there discussing U.S. President Donald Trump's ongoing trade war with Canada, with China, and a number of other countries. Now, we are taking this shot right now because we're still standing by to take you to Prime Minister Mark Carney, who we just saw peeking behind that door a few seconds ago. Our hope is that he'll come out any moment now, and we will bring you his comments. Hopefully, he'll answer reporter questions. That is absolutely the hope, because the entire country is waiting to see how exactly the trade war between Washington and Ottawa is going to play out. Remember that while there was a pause on many reciprocal tariffs around the world, there was no pause on the tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel, some auto parts, and other non-compliant goods in the CUSMA agreement. We'll bring you all the details coming up on CBC News Network.
position for negotiations with the United States, which, as the President and I have agreed, will begin from the start of May. En français, je viens d'avoir une réunion.
So I've just had a meeting of the Canada-U.S. Relations Committee. We reviewed the situation at this time. There are already signs of a slowing of the global economy, as well as the tightening of current financial conditions. So the impacts are starting to be felt here in Canada. There are negative signs on the labor market, particularly in the auto sector. Our strategy is clear. We intend to fight the American tariffs, which are unjustified, protect our workers and those businesses that are affected by the American threat, and rebuild the economy. We have given instructions to Government of Canada officials to start strategic preparations in terms of regulations and a structured response so that there can be efficient and effective negotiations led by the next government, whatever government Canadians decide to select on April 28th. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Okay. Reporters trying to get more questions in and hoping answers will come, but very few did. That is Mark Carney. He is, of course, the leader of the Liberal Party, also the Prime Minister, who has just wrapped up his meeting of the committee, Cabinet Committee, looking into U.S.-Canada relations and national security. Now, most of those ministers just breezed past the reporters, didn't say very much, but Mark Carney did stop for a moment, gave us a synopsis of what happened in that meeting. All of this centering around U.S. President Donald Trump and the ongoing global trade war, which Canada is very much wrapped up in. So let's turn now to CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian, who is also listening in. He's also in Ottawa. Rafi, we were hoping for so much more from Mark Carney, but remind us, what did we just hear?
I am struck by his not taking questions because he may have taken himself off the campaign trail, but there is still an election going on and he is still the front runner according to many polls, and him not speaking to reporters in that context is a little surprising. What he did say in his announcement is that they focused on the slowing global markets, that they are starting to see the impact of the global trade war on the Canadian labor market. Now, he didn't have a specific statistic, but I will say that according to Statistics Canada, last month in March, some 30,000 people lost their jobs, and that may have been the highest number since January 3 years ago. So that's a pretty big jump. And he also talked about instructions that the Cabinet Committee gave to Canadian government officials in terms of their response, and what should come next. There was not much else we heard from him. I mean, we had heard that the meeting would have also focused on China's retaliation to the U.S. as well as on issues at the Quebec border. I will say that my colleague Catherine Tunney, who was there, spotted a couple of officials who are not part of cabinet leaving that meeting, including the fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosso, the former RCMP deputy commissioner, as well as the head of the Canada Border Services Agency, Erin O'Gorman. So those topics, given who was there, would make sense. We also know that Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly was there, so was National Defense Minister Bill Blair, as well as Industry Minister Anita Anand, among others who were spotted by colleagues going behind those doors. This is the third time Mark Carney has paused this campaign to put the Prime Minister hat on and come back to Ottawa and deal with the Trump tariff situation. There were a couple of more Canada-specific reasons. The first two occasions he did this. During week one, there were those surprise tariffs, and during week two, it was in response to the auto tariffs that the Trump administration had long said would be coming on April 2nd.
Today, we also heard from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who made an appearance in St. Catharines, Ontario. What did we hear from him?
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre largely re-announced the various economic measures his party has been putting forward during this campaign so far. Think about the 15% income tax cut they've proposed, or the cancellation of the industrial carbon tax, or how they would make sure that 350,000 more construction workers could be hired for the trades. He kind of repackaged these as what he's calling Canada's Economic Action Plan, and that's a deliberate echo to the language that former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper had used in 2008 when he had put forward a suite of economic measures to combat the recession Canada was in at that time. Poilievre trying to suggest that Conservatives were in charge of the country and they were capable economic stewards, and that this is not something that Carney should be able to just claim for his own, given that he was the governor of the Central Bank of Canada at the time. We also heard Poilievre field questions from journalists. He was asked about the bad opinion polls he's had since the start of this campaign. One of the well-known Ontario Conservative voices, Corey Teneycke, the successful campaign strategist for Ontario Premier Doug Ford, earlier this week had said that blowing a 25-point lead is akin to campaign malpractice. Our CBC colleague Marina von Stackelberg asked Poilievre about that. Here's how he chose to answer.
Liberals and lobbyists want me to stop talking about high food prices. Well, I'm not going to do that, because single mothers shouldn't be going to bed hungry, worried about how they're going to feed their kids in the morning. They want me to stop talking about the doubling housing costs during the lost Liberal decade. I'm not going to stop talking about that. They want me to stop talking about the rampaging crime that's overtaking our streets and the overdose crisis Liberals caused that has taken the lives of 50,000 people. I will not stop talking about that either.
Poilievre was also asked a question about his local candidate in St. Catharines, which is where he was, a candidate who has notably pro-life views, who has even compared abortion to genocide. Poilievre was asked in that sense, would he allow a free vote on abortion as Prime Minister if, say, someone like that candidate put such a private member's motion forward. He said that a Conservative government would never restrict abortion, would never legislate on that front, something he says that's been the Conservatives' policy position for more than 2 decades now. That being said, he did not directly answer the question about a free vote. Natasha.
CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa. Thank you, Rafi.
You're
More than 100 municipal heads from across Canada are trying to refocus the election on an issue that may have dropped off a lot of people's radars. They've all signed an open letter to the leaders of each of the major parties, asking them to take more action on climate change. Now, some of those politicians represent regions that have been devastated by extreme weather in recent years. They're calling on leaders to tackle the climate threat in ways that could also boost Canada's economy. Our next guest is one of those local leaders who has signed the open letter. Spencer Coyne is the mayor of Princeton, a town in southern BC, and he's no stranger to the extreme weather events like flooding and wildfires. Mayor Coyne, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, why did you want to get involved in this initiative?
Well, as most people remember, in 2021, we were devastated by the atmospheric river. So when I was approached to join this initiative, the idea of a national resilience and response recovery strategy just sang to me. So I had to jump in and get involved.
Okay, so then what are you and other leaders asking for of the federal candidates?
So there's 5 main points. Create a national east-west north clean electric grid, build the national high-speed rail network with as like hubs to transportation, build at least 2 million non-market energy efficient homes across the country, make our homes and buildings more warm in the winter and cooler in the summer with retrofits and whatnot. And then of course the national resilience and response recovery strategy.
So let's talk about things like building a national electric grid, moving ahead with high-speed rail. and building a $2 million non-market green series of homes. These ideas are excellent on paper, but right now when the country has so much attention and concern to basic needs not being met, the cost of living, if they have their jobs or not, the threat from the United States, most especially the tariffs, it seemingly might be hard to get this argument across. What's your response to that?
Yeah. On the surface, it might look that way, but this would create hundreds of thousands of jobs. It'd create local jobs. It'd create jobs in rural communities. We would be using wood, aluminum, steel from Canada. We wouldn't be using it from other places. We have a massive housing shortage across this country. Just my community alone, we have roughly 30 people living on the street out of a population of less than 3,000. So, when you start looking at it, these are the top issues across the country. Transportation networks across this country are weak. They're failing. We watch that during any national emergency or any natural disaster. The transportation network is the first thing to get hit. So, you start adding all these things up. It doesn't just make our country more resilient. It also puts people to work. It keeps people working. It keeps our goods flowing, and it diverts our economy away from the United States.
Can I ask you to humanize some of these concepts because they seem so macro? A national rail line and millions of dollars towards green housing. But what have you seen in terms of the actual human impact for the people that you deal with directly?
Yeah, just housing alone. After the flood in 2021, we still have people that can't return home. We have temporary housing. They're kind of like ATCO trailer type situation. We have people living in those. We have people who literally lost everything and they weren't able to secure housing, so they're living on the street. We need homes for those people. It's not that they don't want to live in a home. It's just there is nothing available. So we need the federal government to come to the table, and we need them to be part of the solution. Provinces and municipalities alone can't deal with the size of these crises. So we need the federal government to take leadership on it. A national energy grid. Let's talk about that for a quick second, because we're not all connected. So we're importing electricity from the United States. As we go forward with this tariff thing, we don't know what's going to happen. The Columbia River Treaty is at risk. British Columbia gets a lot of its energy from the Columbia River Treaty. So, when you start adding all these things together, we need to secure our energy. We need to have energy from other parts of the country coming to, service ourselves before we service anybody else. And we're not doing that right now. So when the market's so volatile, you can't even plan for next month.
Mayor Spencer Coyne, I wish you and your community a lot of luck. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
The federal leaders' debates are next week, and CBC News will bring you live coverage from Montreal. The French debate will take place on Wednesday, April the 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be broadcast live with simultaneous interpretation on CBC News Network and live streamed on the CBC News app, on YouTube, on GEM, and on CBCNews.ca. And the English language debate will be moderated by TV Ontario's Steve Paikin, and that's taking place the next day, Thursday, April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern on CBC TV, CBC News Network, and everywhere you stream CBC News. The English debate will also be rebroadcast at midnight Eastern, that's 9 p.m. Pacific on CBC News Network. Now, uncertainty continues to rattle global stock markets due to Donald Trump's wide-ranging trade war. Much of the focus now is on the escalating tariff war between the world's two largest economies, and there is no end to that war in sight. Because today, China increased its tariffs on U.S. goods by 125%. It is in response to Donald Trump's tariffs yesterday that boosted duties on Chinese goods to 145%. The back and forth and Trump's overall trade war have caused big swings in the stock markets all week. To bring us up to speed on what's happening in the markets right now, we're joined once again by CBC's Anis Hadari in Calgary. Anis, what are you seeing now?
So when we look at the major North American markets, if we start with the New York Stock Exchange, they've been sort of oscillating between green and red, going up a little bit, going down a little bit through the morning so far. No wild swings. Again, if we look at the New York Stock Exchange, it's only up about 0.5 percentage point right now. It was down earlier in the day. up before that, down to start out. But all of these swings are actually quite small. We're only talking about a few hundred points in either direction, which really isn't very much. I know the points can be hard to interpret if you're not following the markets, day in, day out, the way that some of us have to. But we're talking about, very small moves here. This isn't showing a lot of panic on the market. This isn't showing a lot of confidence either. It's a similar story on the Toronto Stock Exchange. It's in the green right now, up about 350 points. That is only, like 1.5, 1.25 of a percentage point. So while the Toronto Stock Exchange is also going up, nothing earth-shattering, nothing to make up for the losses that both of these markets have seen since what Trump called Liberation Day, but when he first announced all of those global tariffs. One of the things to also look at, though, are the other indicators on the markets. While we're seeing a little bit of green with New York, the NASDAQ, the Toronto Stock Exchange, the S&P 500, U.S. Treasuries, bonds are not doing very well today. It is looking a lot like global markets are looking at the United States, and the people who move these markets are saying maybe they don't want to have as many investments in America, or they have less confidence in America as an economy as they did before. When U.S. Treasuries don't do very well, that tends to be a sign that what often markets consider to be the safest thing isn't as safe anymore. We see that also with the U.S. dollar. It's been dropping relative to other currencies. So you'll see like the Canadian dollar going up or Asian currencies going up. That doesn't mean that there's confidence in them in this case. It means that there's a lack of confidence in the United States, Natasha.
And so much of the conversation for the past couple of days has been on U.S.-China relations. What are you seeing there?
So the United States and China are not getting along, economically speaking, right now. The two biggest economies in the world have been slapping bigger and bigger tariffs on each other over the last few days. We started out today waking up to 125% tariff on U.S. products being imported to China. That's a tariff from China. And Asian markets this morning dropped as a result. When Japan opened up on Friday morning, had a big dive there. South Korea took a dive as well. Shanghai closed pretty flat, but there were some losses there. So in terms of Asian markets, not a lot of optimism for investors there as well. Essentially, we're looking at the markets telling us that the people who make and want to spend and invest money in both Asia and North America, at best, they seem sort of flat at this point. They don't think they're going to make a lot of money right now, but they're not expecting to lose anything more compared to what they have already been going through over the last few weeks. But the roller coaster is perhaps gaining speed. Okay. It always depends on what anyone happens to say through the rest of the day, Natasha. What can I tell you?
I know, it's early in the day. Anything could happen. CBC's business reporter Anis Hadari in Calgary. Thank you, Anis.
You're welcome.
A preliminary hearing for Canadian businessman Frank Stronach's sex crimes trial begins today in Toronto. The billionaire is facing more than a dozen charges. 13 women have made allegations against him. The CBC's Lisa Shing is outside the courthouse right now. Lisa, tell us what's happening today.
Yeah, hey there, Natasha. So the preliminary hearing for business mogul Frank Stronach is underway here at the Ontario Court of Justice. Earlier this morning, we actually caught Frank Stronach and his lawyer coming into court. I tried to ask him some questions. He did not answer, though at one point he kind of put his hand on my microphone and gently pushed it aside. Really, in all of this, we'll be hearing evidence related to the case. We already have been hearing from one of the witnesses that's been called forward, but there is a publication ban, so we're not allowed to report or make public the evidence that we are hearing. But what I can tell you is there will be two witnesses who will come forward and testify, and really in a preliminary hearing, a judge will determine whether or not there's enough evidence to proceed to trial. So in Toronto alone, Frank Stronach is facing 11 sex crime charges, and that was put forward by 7 different complainants. They range from rape to sexual assault to forcible confinement, and the incidents allegedly happened between 1977 and and 1990s. So a lot of these happened decades ago. So we will be hearing from witnesses for the rest of the day, in fact, and this is likely to proceed for another, at least scheduled for 4 to 5 days, Natasha.
And this is a high-profile case involving a very famous Canadian. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I should start by saying Frank Stronach has denied all of these allegations. He is 92 years old. He is a billionaire. And back in the 1950s, he founded auto parts giant Magna International that's based in Aurora, Ontario. He has received the Order of Canada and at one point was one of the most influential, powerful business people in the entire country. And many of these allegations date back to his time as CEO. Last year, CBC's The Fifth Estate spoke with one of the alleged victims who said it took her 35 years to come forward to police. And even after she did, it took another decade before police laid charges. And that was after new allegations had surfaced. So I spoke with Toronto criminal defense lawyer Trevin David, who is not related to these proceedings. And he talks about some of these challenges going forward with a case that dates back so long.
One biggest issue, I think, for all sides will be understanding how we deal with memory and the frailties of memory when we're talking about things that happened in the 70s or the 80s. I think we all can appreciate how difficult it might be to remember something that happened a month ago or a year ago.
So there's also another case currently in Newmarket, Ontario. Frank Stronach is facing 6 sex crime charges brought forward by 6 other complainants, and that case has been put off until March of next year. Natasha.
CBC's Lisa Shing in Toronto. Thank you, Lisa. With the federal election about 2.5 weeks away, one of the key demographics is young Canadians. How will they be voting in this upcoming election? That story coming up on CBC News Network. In university towns right across the country, many young voters are considering the issues that matter most to them before casting their ballot. CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick is in Kingston, Ontario today, speaking to Queen's University students. So Megan, you're speaking to the students. What are they paying attention to during this campaign, if they're paying attention at all?
Well, yeah, some of them are paying attention to the exams that they're writing today, Natasha. One just let out in the building beside us. So some of the students, you know, they're distracted right now. They are in the middle of exams, not just students here at Queen's, but across the country. And here in this city, though, too, there is a large student population, not just because of Queen's, but there's St. Lawrence College in the city, as well as the Royal Military College. So some of the students we're talking to saying they're not paying attention to the campaign yet, but some of them saying they do intend to once they get through their exams. Yesterday, though, I did meet with some students here on campus. Some of them are political studies students, so they are definitely paying attention. Others were members of the Queen's Model Parliament Club, and so they are very engaged and paying attention. And we talked about whether the campaigns are reaching young people in their opinions, and they said yes. They have seen ads, for example, from the various campaigns popping up on their social media platforms like YouTube and Instagram. These are ways to reach young people. And we talked about the issues that they care about and whether they're hearing enough about them on the campaign trail. In terms of the priorities for these students, they covered a range of issues. Take a listen to some of what I heard.
I think I'm most concerned with the climate crisis and combating it. I was a little bit nervous to see Carney cut the carbon tax because I don't know what policies on the environment he has in store, or if he has any idea on how he wants to attack this issue.
I think as a student in Kingston, the rental prices are like so high, so like the lack of housing affordability is like a big issue for me especially.
I know one of them is definitely cost of living. It's gotten to the point where I know for myself and for a lot of people, a lot of my friends, we're heavily considering whether we can even stay in Canada, because at this point it's just impossible to do things like buy a house.
That last student, they're saying that also he has a lot of family members who are in the military, and so that is an issue for him. He said Canada's defense spending and Canada's position in the world was an issue for him. And some of the students I've been speaking to, they're graduating. So some of what I was hearing, Natasha, a little bit of extra anxiety as they head out into the world, into a job market that might be kind of tough depending on what happens with the economy in the months ahead because of everything that's happening in the world right now, the tariff war, the trade war. That's definitely on their minds as well. One student I met in terms of the level of engagement, he said when Pierre Poilievre came to town a few days ago, he went to that rally. He was curious to check it out. He also said if Mark Carney comes to town, he would also check that one out. This is a Liberal-held riding. It has been for a long time. But the Conservative campaign leader, Pierre Poilievre, did come by here and hold a rally that did draw quite a large crowd. So that's a little bit of what I'm hearing so far, Natasha, in terms of the level of engagement. But definitely some of the students here focused on their exams right now.
So there is a degree of engagement, and clearly some of the students you spoke to have very specific concerns. Does all of that translate into them actually going out to vote?
Well, that's the big question. Yeah, what will turnout be in this federal election? The last time in 2021 for the age group of 18 to 24-year-olds, turnout was about 46%. And Elections Canada, they do surveys to find out why people are voting, why they're not voting. And what they have found in the past is for young people who are students, sometimes cite being away for school as a reason why they don't cast a ballot. Sometimes it can be confusing for students to figure out where to vote, how to vote. Do they vote in the riding where they're going to school? Do they vote in the riding where their parents live? There's a lot of information online for people to figure that out. Here at Queen's and other campuses across the country, there's going to be on-campus voting in the days ahead before Election Day on the 28th. So there will be opportunities for students to cast ballots on campus. And one thing I've been hearing in terms of interest level in this campaign, some of the students saying they think voter turnout might actually be higher, Natasha, because of Donald Trump. There's a lot of awareness in terms of what's going on south of the border, I'm hearing. And so
Megan,
some
I'm
predictions
so sorry.
that
I'm
might
going to
prompt
jump
people
in.
to get out to the polls.
Megan, thanks so much. We got to take everyone to Ottawa because NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is speaking. Let's listen.
I'm worried that if Mark Carney was a chair of a company and was the head of this fund and made this decision as recently as just a couple months ago, he's not going to be someone that's going to crack down on offshore tax havens. He's not going to make sure companies pay what they owe and invest in our country. At a time when we're going through so much uncertainty, we need that revenue. We need those investments so we can actually invest in our healthcare. We can protect workers. We can increase EI payments so workers can actually keep their homes and pay their bills. So I'm worried about that. And there's just more evidence that Mark Carney has chosen to not contribute to Canada when he was managing these huge funds. And here's another example now in the Cayman Islands. Donc, il y a un autre exemple.
So we now have another example of Mark Carney when he was in charge of a company as the chair of Brookfield that used a place in the Cayman Islands called Ugland House, where there are some 15,000 businesses that are registered in that building. And I think this is an example of tax evasion. This is something that is hurting our efforts to improve our healthcare system, to improve our public infrastructure. So I say this is another example of Mark Carney deliberately deciding to avoid paying taxes in Canada. If a business makes profits in Canada, that business must pay its taxes in Canada. So that's a big problem. And I think it shows the wrong values.
Thank you very much. We'll now take the questions from the press. One question, one follow-up per journalist. Maintenant, on va prendre les questions des journalistes. Une question et une relance par journaliste. On va commencer avec Valérie Gamache, Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Once again, Mr. Carney put on his Prime Minister hat, so he wasn't campaigning. Do you think that since the beginning he has abused that role of Prime Minister of Canada by removing himself from the campaign? Well, it is concerning because it seems to me that he's trying to make decisions without any transparency. These are decisions involving renegotiating an agreement where Canadians need to know. And what this raises is what exactly he's going to concede in negotiations with the United States. And these are important questions, and I've been clear on saying that we will never make concessions on the values and the principles behind our healthcare system, the Quebec culture, our water, our critical minerals, our natural resources. So what exactly will he concede to the U.S.? That's a question. Do you think he's abusing that power? Well, at this point, there is no direct attack on us with the pause brought in by President Trump. But what I think he must do, and I'm on Team Canada, I agree with responding to these tariffs. But what he should be doing within cabinet is putting in place a plan to increase the kind of money that people are receiving, because the money people are receiving now represents less than half of their salary. So right now it's impossible to pay your bills with only half of your wages. So we need an increase in insurance, employment insurance, so that workers and others can pay their rent and their mortgage and their bills. But that's not the case now. So that's what needs to change, and I hope that he will take the time to fix that problem, because there are a lot of people who are losing their jobs, and they deserve to have employment insurance that's adequate.
Mr. Singh, we've heard obviously for the last little bit about your views on New Democrats making a difference and such, but to move to an event, the debates next week, given the dire situation for your party, what do you think you specifically have to accomplish in these two debates?
We want to make the case for Canadians that Canada works best when one party doesn't have all the power. And when people have voted for New Democrats, they voted for a party and leaders that have gone to Ottawa and fought for them and delivered for them. Because people voted for us, we were able to deliver things like dental care and the first steps towards national pharmacare. Because people voted for us, we were able to hold the government to account. So I want Canadians to know, in this time of uncertainty, there's a lot of serious questions. What are we going to defend? How are we going to fight back? What do we need to protect? In all these questions, who's going to fight for you? And who's going to hold the government to account? And in all of this, I think Canadians know it's best when Ottawa doesn't give power, or one party doesn't have all the power. And so that's what I'm going to encourage Canadians to think about during the debates.
How will you get that message out when most viewers will probably be looking at Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre to see who's best equipped to deal with Donald Trump? I mean, the lines you've just said are the lines you've been saying over and over again, but like, how are you going to get your message out when most people are paying attention to those two?
I've had some great events or great turnouts at debates, so I'm looking forward to using the debate as a platform to make this case to Canadians. But Canadians know this as well. You ask Canadians, when does Canada work best? And they'll tell you it's when one party doesn't have all the power. They've seen it in the results that we've experienced as Canadians. So when we've got our universal health care, Tommy Douglas was in a position as New Democrats were strong to be able to make that happen. Our old age security, our pension, and most recently, dental care and pharmacare. These things only happen when people vote for New Democrats and send us to Ottawa. And Canadians want someone there to hold the government to account, to hold the powerful to account. That's what we do. Send us to Ottawa, and we're going to hold government to account.
Thank you. Next question, Wyatt Sharp, The News Forum.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you. On the issue of tariffs specifically and how that relates to where your party is in the polls right now, how much of this kind of de-escalation of the support that you have is a result of Canadians, specifically progressives, thinking that Mark Carney, given his fiscal experience, is better suited to lead the charge on this issue?
I think a lot of people are worried by what Donald Trump has been saying and what he's been doing. I think a lot of Canadians are feeling scared. There's a lot of uncertainty. And in all of that, there's going to be some really important decisions. The first budget will be a very important budget about how we respond to the threats of Donald Trump. And in that discussion, I'm encouraging Canadians to consider that Canada has worked best when one party doesn't have all the power. And when you send New Democrats to Ottawa, you get results for people. And in all of this, I think more than ever, Canadians deserve someone that's going to fight for them, that's going to say, no, we're not going to give up on our universal public health care. We're going to fight back against Mark Carney's proposed $42 billion cut to health care, pensions, old age security, to the services that Canadians need. In this serious time, you need someone that's going to fight back against those cuts and stand up for working people, and that's New Democrats.
And yesterday, when I spoke to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, she told me that out of all of the tariffs, she believes retaliatory tariffs are among the most harmful. First, do you have any reaction to that? But then also, looking at retaliatory tariffs, would you look to increase or perhaps decrease the ones that Mark Carney has outlined if you're elected?
I agree with the approach of Mark Carney in terms of retaliatory tariffs. I think most Canadian leaders believe we've got to fight back and defend our country. On the question of defending our country, I think Danielle Smith has not shown that same commitment to defending Canada, and I think it's been troubling, some of the comments she's been making that show more of an interest in supporting Trump or Pierre Poilievre than actually defending Canadians.
Thank you. Next question, Mike Lecouteur, CTV.
Mr. Singh, in your speech today, you almost made it sound like a Carney win is a foregone conclusion. Do you think the election's over?
Well, I think that there is an important decision for Canadians to make. I think campaigns matter. And I think in this campaign, I want Canadians to know that your vote does matter. And if you want someone to hold government to account, if you want someone that's going to fight to make things happen for working class people, for middle class people, that's what we have done in the past. That's what we have done as a party. And you'll need that now more than ever. There's a lot of big decisions in front of us. Who's going to stand up and say people should be put first? Working class people should be never forgotten. Who's going to defend our public universal health care? Who's going to fight back against Mark Carney's cuts? No party should have all the power. Having New Democrats there and holding government to account will mean that Canadians would be better off.
So if this is going to be a minority parliament, as you are clearly calling for, you have said you would never support Pierre Poilievre, and you are now criticizing what you think Mark Carney will make as cuts. So who would you support in a minority parliament then?
Well, I've laid out our priorities, and I've laid out the things that we're going to fight for. In the next budget, which will be the next big decision, the things that matter to Canadians is they've got to be able to afford their groceries. They've got to be able to afford a home. They've got to be able to have some relief because the cost of living is so high. And we've laid out a path to do that. And workers have already lost their jobs. Potentially more might lose their job in this trade war. So we need to have protections in place for them. So concretely, what does that mean? I want to see a price cap on food essentials. I want to ban corporations from buying up affordable homes. I want EI, the amount that a worker receives, to be high enough so they can pay their bills, they can pay their mortgage, their rent, and buy their groceries and keep a roof over their head. And right now, that's not the case. Right now, EI only covers, for some workers, less than half of what they make. No worker these days can actually make it with less than half their salary. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could have made it by. But now it doesn't work that way. So we need to make sure EI is there for folks.
Thank you very much. Next question, Ashley Burke, CBC.
Hi, Mr. Singh. There are some people in the room that you were just in that say maybe after this election it's time for a new leader, someone to build up the party for the next generation. Is this your last election?
I'm focused on the campaign in front of me and the choice in front of me. And that's a very important choice. We're up against a real scary time. And in all of that, I ask Canadians to consider who's going to fight for you, who's going to stand up for you, who's going to fight for the things you need, relief when it comes to your groceries, homes you can afford, make sure that EI covers workers who are now worried about losing their jobs. In all of this, New Democrats will have your back. So send more New Democrats to Ottawa.
When was the moment that you decided that it was time in this campaign to stop saying that you're running to become Prime Minister?
I want folks to know the choices in this election. The choice is really important. I can tell you, having been in a minority government, when New Democrats were there, we made a big difference in people's lives. We were able to bring in things that had never happened before, that New Democrats fought and forced the government to deliver, like dental care and pharmacare. If you send more of us to Ottawa, we'll continue that type of work. We'll fight to make sure you can afford your groceries, that you can afford a home. And so in this time, I think more than ever, Canadians need New Democrats in Ottawa fighting for them.
Thank you. Next question, Mark Ramsey, Toronto Star.
Hi, Mr. Singh.
Hey there.
If we do indeed get a Liberal minority government, and as you say he will, Mark Carney proposes cuts in the budget, are you willing to send Canadians to another election just a few months from now?
Well, the question is, will Mark Carney, he's proposing, he said his plan is to cut. In a time of uncertainty and fear and worry, cutting $42 billion out of the operating budget is the wrong thing to do. That is his plan. That is his words. I think it is wrong for him to do that. He said again and again he wants to cut spending. And he said where he wants to cut that spending, in the operating budget. And he's defined the operating budget. He's laid out what the operating budget is. It's healthcare, it's transfers, it's old age security and pensions. And the amount that he would have to cut to achieve his goal is over $40 billion. That is wrong, and we're going to fight back against that. In the next budget, we can't see cuts to the things that people need. We need to see investments in our country.
When you came in as leader in 2017, you spoke about expanding the party into new areas, particularly the GTA suburbs, where there's a lot of newcomers and people who were inspired by you. That has never happened, and now the party is fighting to remain relevant in Parliament and fighting to keep another third minority Parliament. Can you reflect on that and whether your leadership is the result of that?
Well, I think about what we were able to achieve in the last minority government. I think about people that I mentioned, like Sue, who a senior on a fixed income who lost her teeth because she survived cancer but then lost her teeth in the process. And I was with her in the office when she was told by the dentist that they would be able to give her smile back. And I remember her tears of joy, knowing that she's going to get her dignity back. I remember speaking to a kid who told me that he felt like he was a burden on his family because he was a type 1 diabetic and his medication cost so much. I promised that kid that I was going to fight to make sure he didn't feel like a burden. And we've delivered national pharmacare so that kid doesn't have to worry about the cost of diabetes medication. That's what we delivered for Canadians. If you want more of that, fighting for you and your family, lifting up everyday people, vote for a New Democrat.
Thank you. Next question, Stuart Benson, Hill Times.
Hi there. Sorry, first question, just easy, part B. Can you confirm or promise that your costed platform will be out before the Wednesday debate? And then second part is, do you think that some of your promises, the accusations you make of your opponents wanting to do cuts, would have had more impact or effect had your platform been out more and there had been a more concrete and detailed sort of path forward, as you say?
We will be releasing our costed budget, and we'll let you know when that's available. And Mark Carney is telling folks his plan. Like he has repeated this. There was a question he was asked on whether he would close tax havens or not. And in the response to that question, he didn't answer the question about closing tax havens, but he said he would cut spending. He's repeatedly said he was going to cut spending. He's laid out the areas where he's going to cut. And the amount that he's going to cut is $43 billion. That is not something that Canadians can deal with at a time of so much uncertainty and chaos by Donald Trump. People need to see investments in our healthcare. We need to see protections for workers. And that's what New Democrats are going to fight for.
And then I just want to follow up on the sort of the, I guess, experiment or the initiative you guys have working with influencers. Do you sort of have, is that still something you're doing? Have you learned any lessons from, I guess, the sort of stumble out of the gate? And what do you say to sort of influencers who looked at how the party handled that and say, well, we took a risk as well, and they feel like they sort of got the influencer question feels like they got abandoned when push came to shove? So what would you respond to that?
We encourage working with folks that believe in our vision of investing in healthcare, expanding pharmacare, making the super rich pay their fair share, who believe in closing tax havens, folks that want to use the platform to continue to talk about those things. We welcome. I'm honored and be excited to speak about that. And folks that are out there, I mean, ultimately, I want to speak to electors, Canadians, and let them know the choice in this election. It's an important choice. You got folks that have shown you that they're going to cut the services you need, folks that are prioritizing billionaires and the super rich, or New Democrats who are in it for you, who are going to fight for you.
Thank you. Next question, Matteo Cimarello, Ottawa Citizen.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Both Poilievre and Carney have proposed cuts to the public service. Poilievre, massive, up to $17,000 per year. Carney using AI for efficiencies and so on. I want to ask you your thoughts on the current size of public service and if you think it needs to grow or indeed shrink, particularly if we find ourselves in a minority government.
So we're, like I mentioned, the context we're in right now, we got the threats of Donald Trump and job losses already happening. People are already losing their jobs because of the steel and aluminum tariffs and the auto tariffs. And there's more threats of job loss in the future. At a time when people are worried about losing their jobs, a potential recession, cutting more jobs is the wrong thing to do. So I reject the proposal of cutting jobs at the public sector. That's the last thing we need to do right now. These are folks that provide the services we need. And with the uncertainty, there might be more services that we need to provide to Canadians. There might be an uptake of folks that find themselves without a job. They might need access to employment insurance. We're going to need more public. We're going to need these workers. We're not going to need less of them. So I'm opposed to cuts at a time of uncertainty. I'm opposed to cutting the number of public servants. We need that civil service. And I think Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre's plan to cut is wrong.
I want to ask about work from home. It's a big thing on the negotiation table, and we have several public service unions getting set for bargaining. What are your thoughts on work from home? Do we need to scrap the 3-day a week? Does it need to go further? Do you support the unions in their struggle to have more flexible work?
Yeah, of course I support the unions on this, and particularly the unions were promised that the Prime Minister and the government were going to negotiate work with them to achieve an outcome and to get to a result. They didn't do that. They broke their word, and I think that's fundamentally wrong. That breaks trust. So if you promise to work with the union to get to a result, you should do that. And also from hearing from workers at a time of all these worries around the cost of living and difficulties in people's lives, being able to work from home is a really important tool to combat that. And so I support the workers in their pursuit of getting a fair result and a fair deal.
Thank you. Next question, David Baxter, Canadian Press.
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. Yes, I'll go back to my colleague Ashley's question because with respect, you didn't fully answer it. Early in the campaign, you were saying you were campaigning to be Prime Minister. Even before the campaign, you were. Now that message has had a definite pivot. Was there any one particular moment or a series of moments or events that prompted this shift to bringing forward a more unique idea to the Canadian political landscape?
Well, we just want folks to know the choice they have in this election. And folks will ultimately choose the outcome of Parliament. That's in the hands of the electors. That's in the hands of people. But I want people to know that their vote does matter, and to remind people about what we've achieved as a country when folks have voted for New Democrats. We talk a lot about Tommy Douglas bringing in universal health care. He could not have done that but for the fact people voted for him. People voted for New Democrats, and we were able to achieve these things. People give us credit for having to have been able to fight to bring in dental care and pharmacare. I couldn't have done that. My team couldn't have done that, but for people who voted for us and sent us to Ottawa. So now casting forward, we've got a lot of things on the horizon. And for people who are worried about the cost of living, worried about groceries and homes, who are worried about losing their jobs and EI, the amount that you get just not being enough, the only party that's committed to making these things better for you are New Democrats. You got to send us to Ottawa if you want us to fight for you. And we've said this, and I really believe this, that Canada works best when we don't give all the power to one party. Have more New Democrats, have a strong number of New Democrats fighting for you in Ottawa, and you'll get better results for Canadians.
Personally, I can't recall the last time a party outside potentially the Bloc Québécois really campaigned to be a national power broker party. Is there anything with your team that prompted this shift from earlier in the campaign to now making that the NDP's more overt goal?
We just want Canadians to know the choice that they have in this election, and that choice, I think, is really important. And so reminding people the things that we were able to achieve, it's not just because of us. It's because you voted for us. Because Canadians voted and sent Canadians sent us to Ottawa, that we were able to deliver these things. And I want folks to know that going into the last couple of weeks of this campaign, that they do have an important choice to make. And there's a lot of really important decisions that our country's going to make. And I want folks to know, if you've got New Democrats in Ottawa, the more of us you send, we'll be able to fight for you. We'll be able to stand up for you and make your priorities the priority in Ottawa.
Thank you. Last question, John Woodside, National Observer.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Okay, we've heard the comments. What I guess I'd like to know is, are you explicitly talking about doing another confidence and supply agreement with the Liberals? Is that why Canadians need to vote in enough New Democrats? Is that something you're contemplating? Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. We're talking about the next budget, and the next budget. So the government's gonna be voted in, and then quickly after there'll be a throne speech and a budget. In that budget, that'll be the first budget to respond to the threats of Donald Trump, the threats of the global uncertainty and the trade war. In that budget, we've laid out our priorities, the things that we want to fight for: rent control, a price cap on grocery essentials, real concrete steps to make life more affordable.
Okay. Well, maybe let's put it this way. The confidence and supply agreement, in the past I've heard you speak about how, even if you haven't gotten the credit for it that, perhaps you believe you should, in the past you've described this as being an effective leader for the NDP, one of the most effective, in fact, to get across pharmacare, dental care, etc. Now, if we're talking about potentially doing another type of agreement, if enough New Democrats get elected, is this effectively the new space for the party to be this kind of broker? Were there any lessons learned from that? And let me just kind of add into that question. A lot of the criticism that I think you've been facing lately has sort of swirled around partnering up with the Liberals, yes, pushing them to do certain things, but then them taking the credit for it. So, how do you navigate that as a party leader? If the polls are not doing very well, but that's your room for influence?
Well, we just look at our history. This is what we have done as a party. Throughout the history of our country, literally every single social program was introduced by New Democrats being in a position of power to do that. We look at universal health care, Tommy Douglas. We look at old age pension and old age security and pensions, New Democrats. Dental care and pharmacare, New Democrats. The things that we've done as a society to lift up people, to help out everyday working class and middle class families have come as a result of people voting for New Democrats. That's been the position we played for a long time. Elect enough of us, we can make an influence in getting people some real relief. Things like a price cap on food essentials. Things like making sure that big corporations don't buy up affordable homes, banning them from doing so. These are things New Democrats can deliver for you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the press conference for today. Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Bonne journée.
Thanks so much. Appreciate
We've been taking you live to Ottawa, where NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has been speaking to reporters in the midst of the federal election campaign. A number of questions posed to the NDP leader about his own position and standing within the polls right now, which aren't looking good. So he had to handle that, along with some of the concerns around criticisms with Mark Carney that the NDP leader brought forward. CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian joins us now live from Ottawa. So Rafi, it was quite an extensive set of questions that we got with the NDP leader, but he did actually begin with lobbing some criticism at Mark Carney. Walk us through what we heard.
Yeah, Natasha, we've heard this before from him, essentially accusing Mark Carney of wanting to cut in essential services for Canadians in order to balance the operational budget over the next few years. In 3 years, I believe Carney has said is the goal. So Jagmeet Singh, again, saying, he wants to cut into things like healthcare or public services. Carney has not said he would do that. It's true that he's not been precise on where he would cut in order to balance the operational budget. So that's left a little bit of a vacuum for Jagmeet Singh to make this kind of criticism. Something else that stood out to me, I remember an election year in Canada when an NDP leader criticized a Conservative leader during a debate about their not having released their costed platform yet. I believe Jack Layton asked Stephen Harper, where's the platform? Is it under your sweater? And our Hill Times colleague Stuart Benson asked Jagmeet Singh, will you release your platform before the Wednesday debate? And did not get a clear answer to that. Singh said that they'll let us know, the party will let us know when the platform will be made available. There were a number of questions he didn't really directly answer, most of them about his own fate as a leader, not saying whether or not he would stay on after this election. He would not really address when he made this pivot or exactly why he made this pivot to pitching Canadians on a minority parliament with the NDP holding the balance of power, rather than what he had been saying earlier in the campaign, which is that he is running to be prime minister, which is what a national party leader would normally say to Canadians during an election campaign. He also wouldn't really get into why the NDP is doing this poorly in the polls, really just sticking to this message that Canadians have a choice to make at this time.
Increasingly, the polls seem to suggest that it's a choice between two other leaders. So let's talk about them and what they've been up to today.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in St. Catharines. He held a news conference largely focused on the economy and largely repetitive of previous economic announcements he has made. Think about that income tax cut he has promised, or the elimination of the industrial carbon tax, or the creation of some 350,000 jobs in the trades. He sort of packaged these all together, calling them Canada's economic action plan, words that deliberately echo Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper's plan in 2008 to get Canada out of the recession, because Poilievre is wanting to emphasize that they were in charge at that time and they did a good job. As for Liberal leader Mark Carney, he suspended his campaign today for the third time since this campaign has started, to come back to Ottawa and be Prime Minister and deal with the Trump tariffs news of the week, even though this week there was nothing new specifically announced for Canada. And the Bloc Québécois and Yves-François Blanchet were in one of the rare Montreal ridings they actually hold, talking about secularism. Natasha.
CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian with all the information you need on this federal election campaign. Thanks so much, Rafi.
You're welcome.
Let's take a look now at the weather conditions across the country. Here is Chris Murphy from the Weather Network.
Your national forecast, and once again, April, a very fickle month. Temperatures below seasonal in Ontario and Quebec. That's much closer to seasonal values for the East Coast, well above seasonal in the prairies, and back to more seasonal values in BC. And across the north, few wet.